Yo, what's good, chat? Welcome to this awesome debate. My name is Duke, as you guys already know or don't know. Basically, my channel is exposing a bunch of red pillars and manosphere gurus that turns out to be frauds. So, yeah, and also it's just, it's mainly about the talking points and how, it just doesn't make any sense, especially when we're talking about guys in today's society. So if you like that kind of stuff and you love a little bit of comedy with it, go ahead and check me out at my channel, Duke the Don, on YouTube.
Cool. Andrew?
Yeah, my name is Andrew Wilson, host of the one and only Crucible, the fastest growing debate channel online. Appreciate you having me on. That's pretty much it. I'm streaming right now from Crucible Limited. For any of you out there who want to watch from there, you're welcome to. Because the way StreamYard is set up, unfortunately, I can't really advertise from the channel ahead of time. Because we're both using the same program. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even shouted that out. But it's actually the only way that I can promote that the stream's even going live at the moment. So
yeah, no worries. All right, cool. So Duke, since you were the challenger, we're going to give you the first opening statement. Let's keep it under 5-6 minutes, and then Andrew's going to make his opening statement, and then it's just going to be open field. Right. So like I was telling you guys backstage. You guys are both pretty fiery. So I think I'm going to allow for a little bit more back and forth than I usually do. But if it gets to a point where one person literally can't get a word in, then I will interrupt and mute the other person. But aside from that, I will generally be pretty hands off during this debate. I'll just let you guys hash this out. Again, unless I really need to step in, I won't do it. Okay, so you said, Duke, that for your opening statement, you want to play a clip?
Yeah, let me say a couple things before you bring up that clip, just to provide a little bit of context. So this was in regards to the last debate that I saw online. I think that's when I was in the chat. I think that's probably the whole reason why I got invited to this in the first place, because of some of the statements he made in that, which was about regarding women's rights and, rights being given or enforced by men, right? Things of the sort. And I found a couple things that were a little bit misleading with those statements that he made. And the girl he was debating really didn't provide a whole lot of pushback, which was interesting. But so he was talking about, because it seemed like there was a mixture of different things, right? And the undertone of what I sense he was getting at is part of the reason why men are the enforcers of rights, quote unquote, is because it seemed like it was more predicated on males' physicality, right? Our willingness to be able to be physical in actions and things like that, right? Over a woman. And there were even examples used if there was, if all men decided to go against all women type of thing like that, who would win, even with modern technology, all those different statements, which kind of led me to believe that he's coming from a purely physical perspective when he talks about this and rights enforcement. So we're gonna play that video now. And then I want to go ahead and ask a couple questions on what he means by that, and then we can get going.
Well, just to clarify, so this is the opening statement, so you just talk, and then you can ask the questions once he makes his opening statement.
Women can't make decisions about their own rights because they can't enforce their own rights. So since they have no enforcement mechanism other than men, all their rights come from men, so they can't actually be equal. There's always going to be a differential, and that's a necessary biological truth. It's not saying that women can't be equal in the eyes of men as far as, you can't murder them, abuse them, things like this within the commons that you would do with men. But there can't actually be egalitarianism. It's not even possible because women have no enforcement mechanism. So since there's no enforcement mechanism, there's just it's a laughably absurd idea.
Women have no enforcement mechanism.
I'm sorry. Is it him, or do you want me to elaborate a little bit?
No, yeah, it's still your opening statement, dude.
All right, perfect. So basically, you heard that statement where he's saying women don't have enforcement mechanism for the rights, and women's rights are inherently given it to them by men, right? So what's confusing about that statement is we're talking about a couple different things here, and this is where I want to clarify, and I'm going to actually pass it on to him when he's ready to make his opening statements. But what type of rights are we talking about here, right? Are we talking about human rights? Are we talking about natural rights? And it seemed like when he was going into the debates, he was kind of like conflating the both of it, right? Where it's somehow in some arguments he will refer to natural rights, and then other arguments he will refer to the human rights argument of things, whether it's like, or, you know, God, or at least that's what it seemed like he was hinting. So I want to go ahead and get into a little bit more detail, but I think this is it for my opening statement, and we can get cracking.
Okay, cool. Andrew?
Yeah. So that really didn't tell me much, and he didn't really make an argument, but let me kind of go through this.
Your audio just cut out. It got really quiet. Your mic just...
Hang on a second. Sorry about that. Is that...
It's good. It's good now.
So I did take the time to review my opponent's material. Usually my opponents don't actually review mine. I don't know why this is, but people don't seem to take debates very seriously. They just kind of operate off of pure emotion, and they don't even understand argumentation or structures for arguments. I did go through and take a look at his video where he kind of briefly addressed this, and I was less than impressed. In his video about just for pearly things being exposed, before he got to the section where he was obviously confused about my arguments, he claimed at the 29:46 minute mark that the last draft we had was in World War II. This was after pulling the date live, and the date saying 1973, which would be the Vietnam War, not World War II. But I thought that was kind of funny. And then in hour 14, in the same video, he restates my position that women's rights come from men. And then after a giggle, he actually had no argument and then went into some odd ramble, which was totally unintelligible. He starts by claiming we live in a structured government based around the Constitution, which is a non sequitur, and it doesn't even address my position or my argument. He then goes on to say hilariously that ever since the women got the right to vote, men can't collectively take those rights away. Obviously, this is absurd, and it's self-defeating, because who did they get the right to vote from in the first place? He then goes on to say that I brought up make-believe examples to make my point. And now that he's right about, these scenarios are called hypotheticals, and they're designed to be make-believe examples to test your logic. He then says historically societies were moving towards egalitarianism, which is also laughable. He then finishes by claiming only Eastern cultures oppress women in their framework, which is, again, hilarious because it actually proves my point. As far as kind of what he said in his opening statement, he, again, didn't really give me very much. He just said that from my perspective, he's asking if it's a physical perspective, which relies on enforcement. The answer to that would be yes. He then brings up a category of rights, which I guess we can get into, but I probably reject his framework of what rights are. And then, kind of past that, if he's asking, who has rights, I don't think that we have rights. I don't even think that there's a such thing as rights, at least not unalienable rights, meaning rights that can't be taken away from you. So that's kind of it for my opening statement. I probably would have had more to say, but I haven't actually heard an argument or anything from him. So we can kind of move on from there.
Cool. All right. We're going to get to the open part. So here's the part where you guys just have back and forth and kick it off.
All right. So this guy's saying he didn't hear an argument, although we just posed one. So I guess you're trying to be nonchalant about this, which is cute. Okay. So you're used to, speaking the way, in fact, you're already saying I'm emotional and make people making emotional arguments. And then you're basing it off a video that firstly was just off statement about you. And second of all, realistically, didn't even have a whole fully fledged out explanation for it, because that's not what the show was about. It was just briefly mentioning it, but we're going to do that on this podcast. So my first question to you is, when you talk about rights being able to be taken away or being enforced by men, what type of rights are you talking about? Are you talking about natural rights, or are you talking about human rights?
What do you think the distinction between the two are?
I'm asking you.
Well, are these physical? So I don't, any right that you would consider to be something which is physical from a secular framework, I would consider those to be right. Whether you call them natural rights or you call them whatever you want, it doesn't matter from my perspective.
Okay, but what I'm saying, what do you consider rights, right, that can be enforced and that can also be taken away if men collectivize?
Well, so I would make the distinction in two ways. The first would be an unalienable right. So if you look at the framing around our Constitution, there's only 3 unalienable rights. So the unalienable right would be a right which cannot be taken away under any circumstances. So the 3 unalienable rights would be the right to liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and what's the other one? It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So those would be unalienable rights. So everything else would be a negative right in the Constitution, or the way that we at least perceive rights. So none of them are positive rights; they're all affirmed in the negative, meaning you can't do X. It's not a positive of what you must do or should do as a right, but rather it's a restriction on what you can't do, that type of thing.
So what would you say then? Where would you say the your definition of your rights? Where do you believe that comes from?
I don't think we have rights.
Well, you just got done explaining inalienable rights, right? The ones we were talking about enforcing and being able to be taken away. Where does that come from?
These are conceptualizations, though. Right? I'm just
But
giving you conceptualizations, not what I believe.
We actually have laws that
just stop. Hang on.
Don't tell me to stop.
I need you to understand. Well, I need you to understand my position before you ask the question, because I'm answering the question. So what I'm giving you is a conceptualization of what an unalienable right is. Doesn't mean I believe they exist. It just means that I'm telling you what they are. And then I'm telling you what a negative right is. I'm not saying that those things actually exist. They're all social constructions from my perspective. They're socially constructed. They don't actually exist in physical reality. They're made the fuck up.
If they don't exist in physical reality, how can people enforce it?
They're enforcing a social construction. So the person exists in physical reality. The other person exists in physical reality. But whatever the conceptualization is of what you want to enforce does not exist as some physical metric. So you can't, like, for instance, I can't point out a right. I can't point to it or taste it or smell it or touch it or any of those things. They don't actually exist outside of your own brain. They're just conceptualizations of things.
I'm so all right. So you're saying rights don't exist outside of your own brain, but yet in the physical world where rights are actually important, and in your argument, actually in the previous argument that you mentioned, can be enforced. And also, if men in your hypothetical world were to collectivize, can be taken away, you're also making the same argument that those rights just exist in people's heads and there's no real world consequences towards that.
There's no performative contradiction between the two. So if you have a conceptualization that something is a right, you conceptualize that this is true, even if it's not.
How about we don't conceptualize it? Let's just look at the rights right now.
Because it's a concept. It's a concept.
The Constitution in your last example, right? We're talking about inalienable rights. Let's talk about that. Because
if you don't want me to conceptualize it,
it's a legal document that exists. So it's not something that is in your head. It's actually written down, and we've been following those laws,
bro. If you don't want me to conceptualize, okay. If you don't want me to conceptualize it, then point to where one is. Point to a right. Okay. What does a right smell? What does a right smell like? What does the Second Amendment smell? What does the Second Amendment smell like? What does it look like? What does it taste like? What you can't point to it. It's just a conceptualization of a thing,
no, you
right?
Can point to it. There's a
well, then point to it.
Printed thousands of times that basically says, "Hey, this is what your rights are." And guess what? There's enforcement mechanisms put in place to enforce that document. So you're saying that's just a concept to you?
The piece of paper is real. You would agree. I would agree with you. The piece of paper and the ink and everything else, those are all physical things. But the rights, which are enshrined on that piece of paper, those are conceptualizations. They don't exist. You understand that? They don't actually exist. A right doesn't actually exist. If it does, show me where it is. It's just a social construction. They're made up. They're made the fuck up, dude. Made up.
So here's the thing, because you're this is where you're going with this, and it's actually kind of interesting that you're taking this route, right? Because I understand where you're coming from. You're saying it's something that we conjure up. It's a concept, all right? It's one of those things where it comes from our minds. We put it out there, but at the end of the day, it's just a concept. You can't point to a right. You can't point to a thing. But again, these are the same things that have very real world consequences, whether it's human rights or whether it's natural rights. These are very things that affect people in the real world. Societies build structures and systems around these certain rights, all right, especially the ones that you consider inalienable, even the same one you used as an argument when you talk about enforcement mechanisms being the men, all right? So how can men enforce something that doesn't exist? How can they point to something and say, all right, well, that does, like, you understand how you're taking it from your conceptualized world and it doesn't make sense in reality. You understand that, right? There's two different things. So I'm talking about reality here, rights, not concepts.
Yeah,
So
but hang on. But in reality, they're in reality, they're just concepts. You can afford societies and structure societies based around concepts. We do it all the time. Social constructions, especially, for instance, take a school. A school isn't anything other than a building where people go to learn. What makes it a school? What makes it a school is that we call it a school. Right? Yeah. Well, no, that's not what makes it a school. A school is still a school, even if there's no people in it.
The
right?
structures of the school, right?
Right. So it's all.
You have the teachers, you have the janitorial staffs, you even have the students to make it all work. So at the end of the day, this empty building, for instance, can be repurposed to anything else.
Let me finish.
At the end of the day, time out. At the end of the day, it's the people that make it up, right? They build the institution and the system that turns it into a school. The exact same people that build up the system, all right, from a fictional conceptual document that you want to call the Constitution, and as long as those people abide by those document, it becomes real. So in your other argument,
no, it's not real.
Okay.
So backing up,
back to concepts again.
Well, that's all school is it's a conceptualization of a thing that we call a learning center.
Education is just a concept.
Let me finish a sentence, dude. I let you talk and express whatever you wanted. Let me at least respond before you cut in. So try to understand that what you're talking about is a conceptualization which is applied. Morals operate this way. Almost everything in your life operates around social constructions for normalcy. A stop sign's a social construct, right? There's a physical sign there, but the fact you're supposed to stop there is socially constructed. It's made up. It's not actual reality that you must stop at a stop sign. You just do because you operate as though it's reality. So when you're saying, hey, let me finish, man. So when you're saying, hey, these things are applied to reality, they map onto reality, I agree with you. That's how we talk about concepts. So I'm willing to engage with the concepts being applied to reality, but you need to first start with these are just concepts and they don't actually exist physically anywhere.
No, I can't start with that premise because that doesn't make any sense. Though to me, from everyone else's standpoint, even you're using an example of the stop sign. Okay, yeah, I get it. What does anything really actually mean, right? Unless there were certain laws assigned or governed to it, just like anything else. So the stop sign, it's a pact that we sign with the laws of the society we're currently living in that said, hey, if you see a stop sign, you stop, because if you don't, well, guess what? You're more likely to cause physical harm to other people that exist. So it becomes a real thing.
It's still a concept. It's conceptual.
Okay, listen, I understand the concept you're talking about, but when you bring it to reality, they have real world consequences. So we can't be arguing, okay, well, it's a stop sign, it's a law, it can mean anything or it cannot mean anything. You can't really point to it, but at the end of the day, they still affect people in a very real way, real, tangible, and practically effective.
Yeah, but so what? So saying that a conceptualization can map onto reality based on you behaving as though it's real, I've already conceded must be true. It's the only logical way that can be true.
So it is true.
Are you listening to what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just heard what you just said.
So then you have to start with the presupposition that these are concepts, which you just categorically rejected. So you need to say these are just concepts. Concepts. They're not real. These aren't real.
But they have real world consequences. That's what you're not understanding. You're bringing it back to concept.
No, something that doesn't exist has no real world consequence.
It's a real enough document that it's governing a whole country and in relations to other countries that it's real enough. It's no longer a concept. You don't need to conceptualize the concept.
No, it's still a concept.
It's there. You don't even need to, even when it comes
down to... No, you still need to conceptualize it. You still have to conceptualize the rights.
Explain.
Well, because they don't exist in physical reality, dude. What are you not getting about this? None of these conceptualizations.
Do you believe that even before the concept of good and evil or right or wrong, do you believe that people just didn't know the difference?
What? That's a total non sequitur. What does that have to do with anything?
No. I'm getting to a point though. Because
what's the point?
The point is, no matter what, even if it's in your head, you're talking about what's the concept of right, what's the concept of wrong. Realistically, we all know there's a natural a law that lets us know that there's something good and there's something bad. The natural law of justice and injustice, moral or immoral or unmoral, whatever the fuck you want to call it, right? So those things are something that you would classify around human law, human what do you call it, human nature or human rights, right? Because we all kind of know that stuff already to begin with. So you can call that a concept, you can call it whatever it is, but even though you want to categorize that as concepts, they still have real world consequences to how human govern. So for instance, someone who wakes up isn't going to just go murder their parents because they know that's bad. Now, are you going to say there aren't people that do that in the real world? No, there are people that do that, but the vast majority of people understand the morals. So even if they're concepts, which I don't deny, they are concepts, they have real world consequences. And I'm talking about the real world where you're trying to bring it back to the concepts.
So again, you can act in such a way as though a thing which you conceptualize is real, and that will create consequences. But the consequences are coming from the things in physical reality, in this case, human beings acting on those conceptualizations, the conceptualizations of rights, the conceptualization that that's a school, the conceptualization this is private property. All of these things are conceptualized, but they don't exist in tangible physical reality. So what you're really talking about is human behavior. And I agree that human behavior has direct impacts on other human beings based on however you conceptualize why they're behaving that way, what they're behaving that way for, what they're going to do in the future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all operate on, I think the conceptualizations are necessary and social constructions are necessary for us to live, but that doesn't mean that they exist in reality. So when we're talking about rights, try to understand my position here, which what I'm trying to flesh out is that rights themselves don't exist. Acting as though that they do, I think we can do. And sure, that gives us some impact because of human behavior, but rights themselves don't even exist. They just don't exist. So we're talking in abstracts here. When you say, can you take these rights? When you say, can you take these rights away from these people? It's like, I don't know that they have rights to begin with, especially not unalienable rights, meaning they can't be taken away. That seems paradoxical to me.
Can you roll that clip again, Alex, real quick?
Sure. I think you guys are also kind of going about semantics. You guys largely agree. Yes.
No,
right?
that's what I'm saying. Because like
semantics are important.
Hang on. Stop. Let me just clear this up. So you guys both agree that rights aren't something tangible you can see, but they both have real world consequences. I think you guys can move on to the next part because at this point, this is like we're just semantics. But yeah, I can place the clip.
Women can't make decisions about their own rights because they can't enforce their own rights. So since they have no enforcement mechanism other than men, all their rights come from men, so they can't actually be equal. There's always going to be a differential, and that's a necessary biological truth. It's not saying that women can't be equal in the eyes of men as far as, you can't murder them, abuse them, things like this within the commons that you would do with men. But there can't actually be egalitarianism. It's not even possible because women have no enforcement mechanism. So since there's no enforcement mechanism, there's just it's a laughably absurd idea.
Women have no enforcement mechanism.
Okay, so again, there's you on tape. We're not even talking about concepts. We're talking about reality.
We were talking about concepts.
No, you weren't talking about concepts. You were talking about reality because
we're talking about how people
enforcement is a reality. It's a physical, tangible thing, right? So when you're sitting there saying that women don't have enforcement mechanism for their rights, you are then conceding that it's a physical thing. So moving forward from that, because we both now understand that rights have physical.
No, we can't move forward from that because you're wrong.
Well, because now you're gonna drag it back. I'm trying to move forward from this.
I can't move forward until I get a concession out of you.
So where
I
the
have
rights
to get a
come
concession.
From? Where the rights?
They don't come from anywhere. They don't exist. They don't exist external of your brain.
So you see the position he's taking on now versus the position he took on last time.
The position I had with her,
it wasn't the same one. It wasn't the same one. I watched the whole thing, buddy. And no, you guys were arguing a physical, tangible thing. We weren't arguing concepts. Now the
Okay.
whole conversation has changed
Look,
the concept. So now that I ask you,
I don't.
rights
Maybe
come
you just
from,
don't get
can't
it,
even
dude. I
answer
don't
the
know.
question.
Do you just not understand? Like even when I was debating,
you understand. I really don't think you get it at all.
well, why don't you give me? Why don't you give me?
Right now, if anything else, that's
why don't you give me a second and I'll try to re-explain it
Sure,
to you.
take as much time as you need.
So starting with the FARA debate, just because I can entertain your ideas, and I told her specifically in that debate, I don't view rights the same way that you do, but I can do what's called an internal critique. So if you assume that these things are real and you apply them in life, I can internally critique your position to even see if it makes sense. That's the point of a debate, is an internal critique, which is exactly what I did with Farah. I explained to her and expressed to her, I don't see rights the same way that you do. I'm not even sure that we have rights. Not even sure about that, right? I could be persuaded if somebody gave me a good enough position that we did, but just like I told her, I'm not even sure that we do. But I can internally critique your position where you say, I think that we do, and here's where I think that our rights come from. Here's why I think that they need to be enforced. Just going into somebody's worldview and arguing with them based on what they consider a thing X to be, whether it's a unicorn, a leprechaun, rights, whatever the fuck it is, you can entertain their ideas without believing in them, even if you take the opposite position, man. I don't know why that's complex for you.
The opposite could be true in the same sense as me, because I don't need to go into your world to believe it's just a concept and then just argue from there. So do you see how the opposite could be true at the same time? So why don't we just come to a middle ground? If we're going to talk about the realities or the real worlds, no need to go back and forth with what your idea of rights are, what the idea's rights are. Let's talk about what everyone generally understands as rights, and then move on from there. So it doesn't. Yeah, but that would be granting. It doesn't have to be your definition of what you think rights is. All right, but generally the rights. So for instance, right, when we talk about voting, okay, now we talk about what is the hot topic right now? Abortion. All right, that's a thing, right? So women abortion rights, that's one thing they will consider that, right? So both Republican women and men voted to remove female rights to abortion in certain states. So that's a physical, tangible thing that actually has real world consequences, because that's a situation. In your last argument, you're saying that women don't have rights because men, or because women don't have the enforcement mechanism. But my disagreement is, no, women do have the enforcement mechanism. Since we're not going to go into your definition of rights, what I define rights are pretty much given by governments. Governments, not given by governments, but it's kind of like protected and enforced by governments, which is the system or whatever society that you're living in, right? You sign a pact, they say, okay, you give up some of your rights, you give up some of your authority to us, and then in return, you get to live your life however, pursuit of happiness, live free, do whatever, as long as you abide by these rules. That's the part of your authority you give up, right? So if you sign that pact with the government or whatever society you decide to live in, all right, they also enforce those rights for you and make sure that that doesn't get taken away. So essentially, people who participate in these systems are both women and men. So realistically, I would agree with you if you want to talk about the enforcement mechanism at the end of the day, overwhelmingly becoming men, like in law enforcement, military, or whatever you want to add, throw that into. Yeah, but to argue it and say that women lack the enforcement mechanism to be able to enforce their rights is just wildly absurd.
So so I kind of trying to piece this together so I make sure I get this correct.
Retarded, bro. What the fuck? I don't think you get it. I
don't. Well, you're right. I don't even understand what you just said. So can you give me a more concise version?
Your head.
Yeah, give me a more.
Go back in La La Land. That's what you got to do. Go back into concepts.
Can you give me a concise version of what your argument is as to why you think that it's not a paradox that there's egalitarianism if men are affording the rights to women?
How is that a paradox if men are affording the rights to women?
Well, because the word is egalitarianism. You know what that means, right?
I never used the word egalitarianism.
Well, then you're straw manning my argument, because my argument is about egalitarianism, not rights. Equality.
I'm not straw manning your argument.
So here you are, because it's about egalitarianism. Men and women can't ever be equal. It's not fucking possible. It's paradoxical to say that the people you have to go to demand to ask them to benevolently bequeath unto you rights, that you're equal with those people. That's a paradox.
Well, then we have to define what those rights are, right?
Well, who cares what you define them as? It doesn't matter what you.
Okay,
It wouldn't matter if it's a right to a Snicker bar. So what are you talking about?
So the rights that we have right now, right? That women have, same as men. All right. So that also gets enforced. You're not going to impede on a woman's right to pursue happiness or liberty or whatever it is that she wants. You're not going to impede on a woman's rights to do any of that bullshit. So there is an enforcement mechanism there. And there are certain things that are listed that are there. So to say that it's something that is given to us by men, it's not, because we're operating under natural law now. You understand that, right?
Are we operating under natural law, or are we operating under constitutional law?
Constitutional law is natural law.
What makes it natural?
What are you talking about?
What makes it natural?
Natural rights that come out of it.
What
right?
makes what makes these rights natural? What makes them natural? What makes them natural?
That you signed a pact with the state or whatever society you're living with.
Why is that natural?
Why is it not?
Well, I mean, you're begging the question at that point. So I asked you the question.
Are you trying to conflate that with human law?
Well, no, you conflated
human
it.
law.
So I said,
you can give it up to God. You can say God, because as long as you exist as a human by nature, you can, as long as people don't try to kill you or anything like that, and in justice or injustice, typical things like that, then you're fine. That's
well. What rights do you think God gives you then?
Whatever people believe in religion.
So
it depends on what religion, and most of the stuff comes from Eastern religions, anyways. Like ancient Judaism, like Roman societies, Greek societies. They all had that style.
Okay, so when you're talking about constitutional law, you're saying that constitutional law is an extension of natural law. And what do you consider natural law to be?
Well, it's not an extension of natural law. It's an extension of natural rights.
Okay, what do you consider natural rights to be? Where are they coming from?
Given and protected under a government or whatever civilization you're living in.
So these are
whatever laws that are governing. So whatever laws, so you can't kill people, you can't steal from people, stuff like that.
Got
you
it.
Get locked up for.
So your rights, right? so your rights ultimately are coming from people.
Yeah, just like the same people that make up the schools. And
so if we're going to delineate, got it. So if we're going to make a delineation as to which group of this people's makeup are the ones who are the enforcers of these rights which people have made up, which person group would you say out of the two sexes are the most responsible for that enforcement mechanism?
Those who are allowed to vote and participate in the government system.
Well, not every country you can vote, right?
Well, yeah, okay. So what country are we specifically talking about?
Well, who cares? It doesn't matter. Just as far as a conceptualization. Okay, so
we'll talk about the United States. This is a country I know. I'm not familiar with other countries. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about.
So women got the vote in 1919, right?
Doesn't mean they weren't influential.
Well, who gave it to them? Who gave them the vote?
Oh, he was what do you call it? Men.
Men. Yeah, men gave him the vote. So who
made up the government? Who made up majority of the government then?
Men.
Okay, perfect.
Who makes up the majority of the government now?
Still men.
Men. Yeah. So it's always men.
The crux of the argument is, listen, I agree. I already agree with you that men can act as the enforcement mechanism, right? But what I don't disagree is.
So then you have a paradox.
What are you talking about?
So if women can't enforce their rights and they have to get their rights from men have to grant them their rights because they're the enforcers, then it's paradoxical to say they're equal. If
you want to talk about it comes from a system of participation. So if you're talking about before women getting the ability to vote and things like that, then fine, you have a point and I'll concede that to you. But if you're talking about after women got the right to vote, they participate in the electoral process, whether it's local, state, federal, it doesn't matter. So whatever they choose to vote for, whatever is their self-interest, they essentially have an enforcement mechanism, which is the power to vote. So if we're talking about in today's time, then yes, women do have an enforcement mechanism to be able to impact their will. That's it.
So let's say a woman votes that she wants to be able to have abortions, that women kind of collectively come around and they vote that in. And let's just say, for the sake of this argument, you're in, like, let's say Afghanistan or something. But even here in the United States, it would apply. Let's say that men said, yeah, you voted for that, but we're still not going to let you have abortions. Do you think women could still have abortions?
That goes against the legal process.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Do you think that women would still be able to have abortions if men said you can't have any more?
If we're arguing in the United States, then if the women vote and all of a sudden people just want to overthrow it and the men collectivize and say that wouldn't work.
Why wouldn't it work?
Because the way the system is set up.
The system is set up at the whims of men.
What?
The system is set up at the whims of men. If men decide if the men decide collectively that the system is no longer applicable, it's no longer applicable.
Well, that doesn't happen though.
It does happen. It not only does it, not only it's happened twice here. It's happened twice in the United States.
What country we're talking about?
I'm talking about the United States. Talking about the United States.
Okay,
it's happened twice in the United States.
A group of men collectivizing to try to take over the government. It's damn near impossible.
No, it's happened twice. It's actually almost happened 4 different times, but the first time it happened, the first time was 1776. You know what happened then? Then the second time was during the Civil War. And in that point, they were extremely successful. They formulated their own government, an entire Southern government, and made their own new Charter of Rights and completely rejected the rights of the North.
Right, but you're still talking about when the country was in its infancy and it was still developing. You're always going to have those civil unrest.
The late 1800s was not infancy.
Listen, what you're describing happens to multiple different.
The late 1800s was not infancy.
But if we're gonna, here's the thing. If we're gonna, but what we're explaining is what happens to countries at their early stages. There's usually a split off from their original colonial masters or colonial superiority, and then there's some kind of civil war fostered. Yes, that's always. Listen, that's always the case.
So yeah, but so what? So what?
African countries right now.
Most what?
Hang on. Well, so what? It just
what?
Goes back on your point that you're making. And you don't
no, it doesn't.
Yes,
how?
It does.
Well, then tell me that part.
The point I'm making is this stuff happens when countries are in their infancy. So you're gonna have those early stages of destabilization. But over time, as a country forms their laws and they forms and they're strengthening.
So what?
So what is there safeguards put in place to prevent against that? Why do you think all those 2 times that shit didn't happen anymore?
And if men decide that those safeguards aren't there anymore, they won't be there.
Well, then, but here's the thing. The only difference is those same men have a huge wall of bureaucracy they have to fight through to even make that happen.
No,
it doesn't take them just collecting a bunch of guns. It doesn't take a brute strength to walk up into the government and say, well, I'm going to take it over because, we're sick and tired of the system.
They've done it. It's been done globally more times than you can count.
17, whatever, bro.
No, that's recent. That's the Shah of Iran. What are you talking about? The Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran in Afghanistan.
Iran right now, or are we talking about the United States?
What I'm saying is that if this can happen, Duke, if this can happen there, why couldn't it happen here?
Because we're well established.
They were more well established.
Do you know how destabilized
the United States is? One of the youngest nations on planet Earth, sir. One of the youngest nations.
Exactly my point. What I was saying earlier, this bullshit only happens to young nations in their infancy.
This is one of the youngest nations on planet Earth.
It's difficult for men to do that. So if we're going back to the West, the idea of the West, a bunch of dudes who are all of a sudden sick and tired of, the way the government's running and they take up arms to overthrow it, it's not going to happen because the government's way too established. So when you're making my point, it's only in younger countries when they're highly influenced and in their infancy that insurrections and you have the changing of guard and civil wars that happen. But when we get into established nations, there's safeguards put in place because they learned from their lessons when they were in their infancy. That's how they work. So what you might have a case back in the day, but in today, you're wrong. Women do have an enforcement mechanism. It's called the federal government.
You mean men?
Which is largely men and women. So it's not solely men.
Well, no, it's mostly men who are the enforcers, though. So politicians don't.
Now you got women in the police forces.
Politicians,
in the military.
Politicians don't enforce laws, right?
They create. Well, no. Time out. One branch create laws, the other one judges it, and the executive one sort of.
So all non sequiturs they don't care about. Who enforces the laws?
Non sequiturs. Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, they're not addressing my argument, which is who you can say who makes the laws, and I would agree with you who makes laws, but who enforces the laws?
The government.
Yeah, but
That's holding.
if you were
When you
to
sign a contract with the when you sign a contract with the state, aka your citizenship, you're basically going into a societal agreement. All right, you agree to give up a certain amount of your rights, and in exchange for that, we will protect whatever is left of yours. All right, so that's the whole thing. So if anyone, meaning any other human being, all right, that breaks the laws, meaning they accost you in some kind of way, where they steal from you, or they try to kill you or your family members, all right, your rights will be enforced by the state because that's the contract you signed. So they act as the enforcer. Now, if you want to get into the weeds of who are the people actually going in and arresting these people or doing the investigations, yeah, you can have a say and say, yeah, the majority of them are men, right? Because they make up the police forces and they make up the military and things like that. But doesn't negate the fact that there are women in these positions too. Not only that, there are women that serve atop of those hierarchies that enable the enforcement of the rights of other people.
So we've established then that men are largely the enforcement arm of rights and laws that politicians
They're
pass.
largely, but not solely.
I didn't say they're solely. I just said
in the last argument, it kind of seemed like you were hinting at that because you didn't say it.
So largely
Just
they are.
Be specific.
Largely they are, right? You agree with that? So if that's true,
yeah, I agree with that 100%.
So if those men,
it's a no-brainer.
So if those men decide that they're going to stop enforcing those laws by the government, if they just decide to do that, let's say they go on strike or something like this,
which department?
Or the police force,
the Army, Navy, police.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. Like, let's just take a look at the riots that happened, the BLM riots that happened. If police forces are told to stand down, right? There's nobody around to enforce your rights. Who's there to enforce your rights when someone's throwing a brick through your window? Who's there to enforce your rights when neighborhoods are getting burned down? Who's there to do that if people decide not to enforce your rights for you?
Well, you know what actually happens in those cases? Especially in those cases where anarchy starts to form. All right.
Men with guns enforce their own.
Right. So you get people who come out with guns and they enforce it, right?
Yeah, men.
And those men can enforce it on behalf of what? To protect
themselves.
Their families, right?
Yeah.
And those families usually include moms, daughters, sisters, aunties, right? So one can argue that they're being influenced by that because they don't.
Who cares who they're influenced by? They're the enforcers, bro.
To be hurt, right? So there's a motivation to enforce that right if the government fails. So either way, it's not still solely men. Even if men decide today that collectively we're going to go to war against women, hypothetically speaking, I mean, it's never going to happen. But if in that case, the reason why it'd be impossible because there would be other men who would stand up and fight against that. By definition, and even biologically speaking,
so that's my argument.
The enforcement arm of women. So
then I'm right.
So exactly, that's the point. But in your argument, you were saying you were making it seem like it was solely men. If men decide to collectivize and take the rights, it still doesn't.
It is solely men, because what you're saying is that men would have to be the ones who stopped other men from taking away women's rights. So it's solely men, bro.
By their women.
It's still solely men.
By their women.
Who they're influenced by doesn't matter.
It does kind of matter because your reasoning for doing something kind of makes sense. You wouldn't just do something for nothing now, would you? You wouldn't just take up arms and defend what?
What their motive, bro? What their motivation is irrelevant. The fact is that all women's rights, all of women's rights are come from men because men are the enforcers of the rights. You agree that that's true. You agree that when anarchy,
let me finish, Duke. Have enforcement mechanisms.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
Enforcement mechanism are men.
Let me finish my point and respond to it.
Women as well.
Are you ready to let me finish my point? You tell me when I can finish my point. I just let you go on your whole diatribe, and I didn't even interrupt it. So just hang tight. You agree with me on these.
Dude, chill, bro.
You agree with me on these concepts. The conceptualization here is that men are the enforcers of rights. You agree that that's true. You agree that it would necessarily take men to stop other men from taking away women's rights. We also agree that that's true. So no matter which way you cut this, the rights of women come from men. And so therefore egalitarianism or true equality is impossible. It can't be done because it's always just begging men for the rights. And you can say, but women can influence men to act as their safeguard for rights. That's true. They could do that. They could use sexuality or bribes or any number of different mechanisms to do that. But they're still utilizing men as the enforcement mechanism for their fucking rights. You can't get away from this. It's circular.
So, okay, but here you go again. All right. But it's not largely men, though. You got to understand that, because when we're talking about governments, it's a system, meaning there's men and women. So you would have that there's a wall of bureaucracy there that includes both men and women when we're talking about governmental societies, right? So there are women that play a part. Some of them, if they're higher up in the hierarchy, right, they play a higher role in the enforcement of certain rights, and they use men. So if you want to talk about using men as the strong arm, right? Yeah, you're right. But if we're talking about overall, yeah, women have a heavy influence in enforcing their rights.
Well, they have. You can say that women can influence men to enforce their rights for them, and I wouldn't disagree with you.
And I think still using it.
I think that's possible, but who are they relying on? They're not relying on them. They're relying on men. So still, it's due to the benevolency of men that women have rights, and the opposite isn't true. The opposite's not true. So we don't need women to enforce our rights. That's the distinction, and that's why you can't have egalitarianism.
I disagree.
You disagree that we need women to enforce men's rights?
Yeah, because if you're voting, what do you think? 50% of women are the other half of the voting block. What are you talking about?
So again,
it's men and women that got abortion banned.
The vote is allowed
men
because
and women took away men and women, and due to certain beliefs, work together to remove the rights of other women. The same thing can happen backwards. We don't just work in a system that requires brute strength of men. We work in a system that has working pieces that involve both men and women. And some of those women are in leadership positions, which have a bigger influence when it comes down to affecting other people's rights and influencing and enforcing their rights as well. So for you to, because it seems like you're making.
Who enforces their right to vote? Who enforces their right to vote? Who? Which sex enforces their right to vote, Duke?
The government.
Which sex enforces their right to vote? Overwhelmingly. Which one? Which one is it?
Both sex.
Both sex overwhelmingly are the enforcement arm, huh?
Well, if you're talking about sex, well, we're gonna talk about who majority is in office, right? We'll say men.
No, the enforcement. Who's gonna enforce the woman's right to vote?
Okay,
it's going to be men. It's going to be fucking men.
We're talking about the police force.
All of them. All enforcement arms.
We can agree that it's largely men in these positions and roles, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then now we're getting to a conversation in terms of what men naturally gravitate to versus what women naturally gravitate to in terms of work, right? And that'd be based off of biology, because men biologically fill up these roles, right?
Yeah,
protector roles, right?
That's right. Yeah,
fill other roles that are support structures, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So be that being said, it's basically people working together to make that happen. It's not.
Oh, sure. I think that men and
it's not like it's just the men, and that's. Just
I think that men and women have to cooperate. Of course we do. I think that that's in our best interest to do, but that really doesn't change the point, which is that you say, wait a second, Andrew, women can vote. And my argument to this is like, they can only vote based on the enforcement mechanism of men. They can't enforce their own right to vote. They can only allow the enforcers to enforce their right to vote. And you just kind of agree with me in this circular loop over and over and over.
To the point that it's already done. But if we're talking about after the right to vote, if men try to take that away, they're going to run into a wall of bureaucracy that'll make it impossible for them to take away rights for women to vote. There's too many special interest groups that rely on the votes of women. The American corporation lives off the votes of the women.
And who runs most corporations?
Governmental policies.
Who runs most corporations?
They live in off. What?
Which sex are most of the lobbyists, and corporations largely are run by which sex?
A lot of women.
Largely by which sex? What's the biggest demographic of people
who head corporations?
Yeah,
men
or women
in leader. Well, time out now, because we got to figure it out, right? Are we talking which level position?
All levels.
Okay, now which type of corporation are we talking
about? Doesn't matter. All corporations. All corporations.
We got to be specific because we're talking about.
Why do we need to be specific? If you weren't specific on which type.
More educated in today's society, and they're filling up a lot of these C-suite corporate jobs that you're seeing out there, and a lot of these men aren't competing right now.
Bro, at the top levels, The
levels are men.
the hierarchical institutions are run by men. All of them are run by men. The entire enforcement is men.
Do you see why I wanted to specify? I said which level. You said it didn't matter. Now you're going in specifics. So that's why specifics are important when we have this conversation, because we're talking about top level. There's no doubt there's a lot of more male CEOs out there. Matter of fact, if you want to talk about top levels of governments, there are more males.
So all these checks and balances for enforcement are men.
Different sections.
So all these top levels. So
you start to see a different statistic.
So all these things that you quoted as being differentials of power, which women could utilize to enforce their rights, are all run by fucking men. Largely run by men, almost overwhelmingly run by men at every single level. The enforcement arm of the police, the military, the corporations, everything is run by men.
What you're denying right now is the influence that these women embedded in these corporations, embedded in these governments have within. So much so that a lot of these men who are headed a lot of these top institutions are heavily influenced by the women, to the point where a lot of them, they have special interest in voting for women, right? They have a lot of special interests vested in that. So
that's right.
You can't just look at that situation. But then you're looking at it purely from a physical and a job perspective.
Look, you're totally right. Look, there's nothing to even argue. You're totally right. There's lots and lots and tons and oodles. Hang on, let me finish. Let me finish, Duke.
But you're leaving out some parts that I have.
Let me finish, Duke.
I want to make sure we're not sitting here in the agreement of the same. Listen, because you're saying it's solely men. I'm saying no. So just keep it at that.
Okay. So Duke, what you're saying here is that if women go vote for their own rights, that all the checks, balances, everything, which is the enforcement arm, is run by men. I totally agree that women can influence men to protect their rights. I'm just disagreeing with you that women themselves can protect their own rights without men, and that men can protect their rights without women. We don't need them to protect our own rights, which is why when you take the anarchy situation where you have like the Black Lives Matter riots, you say, look, when the police don't show up, what happens? Men grab guns and they begin to enforce their own rights. Women aren't doing that. They were not grabbing the fucking guns. They're not enforcing their own rights. They're not doing any of that because they can't. They can't protect themselves against men.
Enforcement.
What's that?
What do you consider enforcement of rights? What
threat of violence? Threat of violence is
the threat of violence.
Yeah, so, that's enforcement.
Well, if we're arguing off of that, then yeah, you have a point, because my thought of enforcement.
Well, what else could it be besides threat of violence? It can't be anything.
You don't have to locking somebody up and arresting them for violating somebody else's right.
That's threat of violence. That's threat of violence.
That's the threat of just detaining someone.
That's wait, whoa. Hang on. What happens if you don't want to be detained?
Well, then you get arrested.
Well, how do they arrest you if you don't want to be arrested?
They put you in handcuffs.
They beat your fucking ass, right? And then put your.
What? So okay.
You say I don't want to be arrested, officer. Fuck off. And you turn around to walk off. Are they going to tackle you? Are they going to use physical force in order to subdue you?
So they're going to use physical force, but they're not going to beat your ass right off the bat, because remember,
but that's threat of violence. That's violence.
That if police officers actually assaulted the people they're arresting, they are liable for that.
That's violence. That's violence. Do you understand that that's all violence? It's all threat of violence. If you don't want to be arrested, the only reason you turn yourself in is because you're told to.
It's threat of loss of freedom.
That's violence. If you hang on, violence? Because if you try to escape from prison, what happens?
They catch you.
How? Well, what if you don't want to be caught and you resist?
They physically restrain you, and if they only get violent. Are you trying to say they only get violent if that civilian gets violent?
No, right? What I'm saying is that the threat, the enforcement of all rights is the threat of violence. It has to be necessarily. Because if you don't,
listen, I have a different definition of that. The enforcement is the threat of loss of freedom. That's it. That's really. I'm not. I mean,
how can you have your freedom?
But like, here's the thing. The thing is, checks and balances are also, although it's not followed perfectly, there are checks and balances in place when you talk about law enforcement and how they engage with civilians, even civilians who don't adhere to authority right away. There's still levels of engagement. Police forces teach this stuff all the time. They're not gonna go straight to punching you and beating your ass. They're gonna go through these different steps of engagement
as long as you comply.
They get to that point, and for them to get to that point, they have to feel the threat threat of violence coming from the opposite person. So
Well-
from your perspective, if the person is actually being physically violent, then yes, that force has every right to meet violence with violence. But
Well, no,
when
they
you're
don't
trying
have to be.
restrain someone, it's not usually violence. It's usually just the threat of loss of freedom.
So-
That's
so,
it. Loss of
Duke,
freedom and loss of the rights that you signed with the government when you were born or when you
Hang on,
immigrated
hang
to
on.
the country.
Hang on, relax. You can't sign an agreement when you're born, by the way. But that aside,
It's called a social security number.
that's not signing an agreement.
And,
But that aside,
tell that to
as
Uncle
you
Sam.
as you walk out, if you're in prison, you've been imprisoned, okay, and you just say, "Fuck this! I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like this whole being imprisoned thing." And the gate opens one day for no particularly good reason, and you just walk out. And you're not using any violence at all, and police officers come out to collect you. And you say, I'm not going to use any violence, but I'm going to keep walking this direction no matter what, right? Will they use physical force to restrain you and drag your ass back to prison?
Yeah,
That's violence.
that's physical force.
It's violence.
They won't.
What is violence then?
They classify it as restrainment. That's a legal term.
Yeah, but it's still violence. It's always threat of violence. They're using violence to stop you from doing X
But they're
thing
not.
you
They're
want to
not
do.
straight punching you or beating you or shooting you.
That's
right
not
away.
violence.
In some cases, yes, but they
just-
use restraint. They have their own level. They have literally. They're like, what is it? Like 5 steps in like these police departments of threats before they get to the point where they're using violence.
Duke.
So so if you're using law enforcement,
If you
they
grab a
have their own
person's arm
classification
and they
of
don't want their
violence.
arm grabbed, are you being violent with them?
No,
No?
That's a form of restrainment. I think punching somebody is a form of violence.
So if somebody was strong
Threatening
enough
to
to
shoot
hold
someone
you
is
in
a form of
place
violence.
physically and stop you from moving, you don't think that that's violent?
It depends on how.
They're just holding you and you can't
That's
move.
restraint.
Yeah, so that's not violence in your mind. So if
That's
somebody
restraint.
who's super strong, so if you went,
where it turns to violence is while they're restraining that individual, they're punching them. They're committing some kind of
okay, so hang on. So if a 5 foot, let's say you were dating a 4'9" woman, okay, and she was 96 pounds, and you went over to her and said, "You ain't leaving, bitch," and you grabbed her. You didn't hurt her, but you grabbed her and you held her in place and said, "You can't fucking move from this spot until I say so," and you wouldn't let her go. You're saying that that's not violence?
legally they call that a tort.
Is it violence though?
It's technically just a 1 step below battery.
So is it violence?
What are we talking about? Are we talking about your definition or legal definition?
Your definition is that
I'm talking
violence?
about the legal definition. It's a
Well,
tort.
what is your?
Misdemeanor tort.
You don't think that's? Do you think that's violence or not, Duke?
I think it's restraint.
Do you think that? So you don't? Would you say then the answer is no, Andrew? You're not being violent with this woman.
Physically restraining someone is not being violent.
So then
You're
just say
physically
no.
restraining.
Just say
You
no.
call
That's
it
not
assault.
violence.
You can classify that as assault. I would go with you on that definition. But
So-
saying it's violence,
well, wait,
that starts to
assault.
lead to a slippery slope. Because anyone who says, "Oh well, I didn't like the way that guy grabbed my arm," that's also all of a sudden considered violence. That's
So that's not. So then, if you grab a 4'9" woman and you're not hurting her, but you won't allow her to move, and she wants to move and she wants to leave, and you won't let her, and you're holding her in place. I need you to tell me. I need you to hang on, Duke. I just need you to say, Andrew, that's not violence.
No, that's not violence. It's restraint.
Okay. Well, then there's nothing more I can say to that.
We're about an hour in. I want to clarify the disagreements because I think there's a lot of semantics going on. I'm honestly, a lot of the chat is confused about what your differences are, and I am too to some extent. So let's just go one by one and very clearly and succinctly, if you could just clarify in a very succinct way what your disagreement is with the other person. Why don't you start off, Duke, since you're the challenger, and then Andrew can go next. Go ahead.
Well, see, my disagreement that kind of already got clarified because it seemed like we're on the same page. He just has a different definition. Was that men being the sole provider and the sole enforcer of rights, right? If we're talking about right now, it's not the case because we have the system of government, right? And then when we talk about where rights come from, I mean, we got to go into concepts. So my definition is the pact that you sign with the state, all right, where you give up your rights and then, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and your rights to not have that impeded by anybody else, all right? So that gets enforced by the state, all right? And not just by solely men, all right? It's by men and women that make up the foundation of the system of government. That's just basically it. That's my major disagreement when he makes it seem as though that it's men that are sole responsible for that. Now, men can be operating in those enforcement channels, like in the military. They can be operating in the police forces, right? Overwhelmingly, but that doesn't negate the fact that women participate in those systems too. All right. And then when you get into that argument, it almost seems as though it's like now you're getting into jobs, right? And it's biological because men choose these jobs that are more provide and protect, and women overwhelmingly don't gravitate to those jobs, but doesn't mean that they don't both participate in enforcement of the rights of the state that the state affords.
Dude, I think Andrew would agree with you that women participate to a smaller extent than men. So what would be the actual disagreement you have in terms of that point between him and like what do you think he's wrong about? Or did you clear up your disagreement? Duke, can you hear me?
Oh, so I thought you were talking to him. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was saying, I think Andrew would agree with you that women participate in the enforcement of rights to a small extent and that they're involved in the system. So what would be actually your disagreement with him specifically in terms of
That was my main point, because like I said, that's why I brought up that video, because if you played that video back, the way he was talking to her, and that was like 4 minutes into the the live stream you guys had. So right off the bat, when I saw that, I'm like, what is this guy saying? Is he saying that men are the sole enforcers and givers of rights? What society are we talking about here, right? And then all these other things where he's got to bring you into these hypothetical situations to kind of make a point, but it doesn't mesh well with reality, because reality, it's a body, it's a system, it's a bureaucracy. Before you can even have a group of men collectivize and make something happen, you're going to have to work through that blob that's there, right? That just is what it is. So I think when you're making arguments like he did in the last debate that he did with that one chick, right? I think it's important to kind of clarify what you're saying, because it honestly sounded crazy.
Okay, let's kick it off to Andrew. Andrew, do you have any specific disagreements with Duke?
Yeah, I mean, kind of where to begin. So kind of back to this topic of violence. I'd like to know what your definition of violence is.
Causing physical harm.
So do you think you don't think that imprisonment's causing physical harm?
It depends on what happens when you're in prison. Being in prison by itself doesn't cause physical harm. Maybe mental harm, psychological harm that could eventually lead physical, but imprisonment itself is not physical harm. It's not violence. Neither is restraint. Violence? Restraint isn't violence.
So you wouldn't say that somebody imprisoning
if it's unwanted, but it's not violence.
So you don't think somebody imprisoning you against your will is violence?
If it's against my will, I'd basically call it kidnapping. If I'm falsely held against my will, right? And now, if there's force applied, if there's an act of violence applied, like force, right? And by force, I mean whether it's hitting me or doing other hurtful methods to subdue me, right? Then we would classify that as a violent imprisonment.
So a guard up in a tower with a Mini 14, which is what usually prison guards carry. Not too many of them in American prisons, but there are always a couple on staff who have Mini 14s. They're up in the prison watchtower, and they're there. And what do you think that those people are there for? What do you think the guards with the Mini 14s are there for? With the live ammunition, the live rifle bullets? To
ensure your imprisonment. And if things get too wild, or if things get too violent on the prison yard, like stabbings or prison riots, right? Yeah, because they're meeting the level of violence with violence. So if you see shankings in a prison yard or mass riots, that's violence in itself, because there's a harmful act being committed within the prison yard. So these guys, in their whatever manual or training, they're required to use certain level of violence to meet that level of violence going to prison yard. Just because they have a gun doesn't mean anything. A lot of times it's just a deterrent, most of the time. But when shit pops off, they have it to make something happen. Yeah. So you would say it's threat of force, right? Yes. Yeah. So that's isn't. Okay, so if restraint isn't, I got the definition of violence here. I just wanted to see if you disagree with this. This is definition 2. Strength of emotion or an unpleasant or destructive natural force. Would you say that holding a woman down and not letting her move, or holding her in place and she doesn't want you to hold her in place, would you say that that's a destructive natural force? I'm curious, because the definition I found here is behavior involving physical force intending to hurt. Yeah, look at definition 2 or something. Look at definition 2. But I mean, there's the main definition. Definition 2 is just a subset of it, right? Yeah. But still, those are important. Those are important because it means more than one thing.
So when we're talking about this, we're talking about violence. Would you say that strength of emotion or an unpleasant or destructive natural force would apply in the arena of you being forced down against your will?
Keyword destructive. So yes.
Yeah. So then it is all threat of violence. Then is how you enforce rights, and men are the enforcers of rights using threat of violence. Since women don't generally use threats of violence, how could they enforce their rights? They definitely can't enforce them against men because there's no real threat of violence. So imagine, for instance, even taking the example of a prison. Can you imagine if you were to take MS-13 and imprison, let's say 300 of them in a prison, and then you made all female guards? What do you think the outcome of that would be?
Well, we know what the outcome of that is going to be. Physically, it's not, you'll have some of these, prison guards probably sleeping with the inmates. Some of them will probably get taken advantage of, right? So it's not very practical, right? See, I'm not denying, listen,
The reverse is practical. Why is the reverse practical?
Because listen, what you're making the argument that makes my point. It's a purely physical thing, right? Because men are physically superior than women. So that's what you're classifying as one of your main aspects of enforcement, right? That men have. So I get that, but I'm saying that there are aspects that women have too that doesn't have to have physical force, right? Doesn't have to require that, but they influence others that do have that capability of physical force. You understand? So again, like I said, we're not disagreeing here.
There's no disagreement. You just have to concede.
I want to make sure it's different.
Then here's all the concession you need to make. Then is that, Andrew, you're right, that rights as far as women go, their rights come from men because men are the enforcement arm of all of women's rights.
I got to push back. They don't come from men. They come from the system. They come from government. That's it.
That's all men. The
government itself is made up of a bunch of other people, men and women.
Mostly men.
Not solely from men. Maybe before the right to vote.
But all of the government's enforcers are men.
Now we're gonna go into the forces, and you're right, and I agree with you on that. But they're not.
And you're just right. Then I'm just right. Then I'm just right.
Solely men.
Can you name a place on planet Earth then where any government exists where the enforcement arm is mostly women? Just one. Anywhere.
No, because that's not practical.
Because they can't. Because women can't enforce their rights, dude. I'm sorry, they can't. They can't do it. Like, that's not it's just a descriptor.
If a woman wants to enforce her rights, okay, she'll find other means of doing it. For instance, when the prohibition happened, right? Before they even got that passed into law, women did physical acts like marching. All right, there was even an old granny that went around going into different bars, smashing up their drinks, smashing up their liquors. The guys were there. They were actually stunned, and none of them really did anything, right? In terms of enforcing their right to drink. Now, when this old lady was in there beating up the chairs and tossing all that stuff, right? And you know what she did? She said, well, God told me that I have to do this. And it scared a lot of these men. So much so that it made her some kind of small town folk hero that gave other men the inspiration to ride with her to get prohibition enacted. So that was due to a woman having physical force, or at least using physical force. Now, when we're talking about physical force,
what physical force did she use? What physical force did she use?
She used a cane to destroy a bunch of beers and booze and windows.
Yeah, but she wasn't applying physical force to men.
No, that's why I just said that.
Right?
It's like, no, I just said that earlier. They don't have to use physical force against men, but doesn't mean that women don't have the ability to use physical force to get things done. That's what I'm saying. So,
I think
even prohibition.
Yeah, I think coerciveness
of American history, and women were solely responsible for that.
That's true. That was all coercion by women, and I agree with you that women can coerce men to enforce their rights, but they just can't enforce them themselves. That's my argument.
What's going on here?
I don't have anything else to say because we're just gonna keep going back in circles. That's where we keep going. Like I don't like. I mean, we agree largely, but like again, I just think that it's one of those things where if you're saying solely men, men have the physical prowess, especially when going against other men too as well. But listen, it doesn't negate the fact that women don't have influence in that too as well, especially when we're talking about system of governments. That's it, right? So we agree, but then you go back to men being the enforcement arm, which I also agree, but I would say women are in those positions too as well. Not largely, not in overwhelming numbers, but they do have positions in there too. And they're occupying every other aspects of the enforcement arm of that same government body that gives or protects other people's rights. So by definition, just making it seem as though it's all men because you pivot to the enforcement arm. Okay, you may have a point because they fill out those roles, but still they're not. And we're talking about in a modern country, they don't overwhelmingly.
In any country, they overwhelmingly do. Yeah.
I said in the modern country. Well, no,
in any country on planet Earth.
There's not as many women in these physical forces like Army and Navy or even the police forces in other countries compared to the West.
Yeah, so, but even then, no matter where you're at.
If you want to go to Saudi Arabia, you may have a point there. All right, but we're talking about Western countries. There's a reason why the East and West are completely different. It's not only economy-wise, culture-wise, but just everything-wise because our values are different.
I agree that we have different values, but
that's what makes the country work.
There's some values you can't get away from, which is that the enforcement arm in all of these nations is always going to be identical. It's going to be men. Since men are the enforcement arm, saying that we can actually have true egalitarianism or true equality between the sexes is fucking ridiculous. If you have a conceptualization in your head of what a right is, and that right should be afforded to women, you have to necessarily say that they're coming from men because men enforce those rights. And so since that's true, it's paradoxical to say that we can have an egalitarian society because at any time they choose, men can revoke that status of enforcing women's rights.
So let's get into this egalitarian thing for a second. All right. So okay. Listen, in terms of obviously men and women are not equal. And one of the biggest thing to point out is the physical aspect of it, because that's one of the main arguments that a lot of people point out to, right? But
that's simple to look at, right?
Well, yeah, it's simple. It's simple to look at, right? So it's usually the physical thing. But this is why a lot of these laws and policies are been in place, right, to try to level the playing field. Now, the playing field would never 100% truly be leveled because even some coming down to sports, right? Men are you can't.
Then we have no disagreement.
In sports, right?
Then we have no disagreement. Then
right. So that's what I'm saying. So when it comes down to all these different things, right? I would say when we're talking about equal, I would say in the form of maybe not physical, but in terms of other aspects to complement what men do, absolutely we can have a society, right? And that's why there's certain things, right? Even the government, right, that are influenced by women, they also cast their votes to put things in. Like I don't know if it's overwhelmingly women that are responsible for affirmative action, but one can say affirmative action is kind of a way to try to equalize the playing field in certain fields, right? Where they demand certain jobs be staffed with what do you call board members, be a certain amount of women or things like that, right? That's their way to try to level the playing field in those aspects. Now, I think on one hand, you might have success in the short term, but on the other hand, it might pose some troubles in the long term because you're not looking at other qualifying measures, right? Whether if they're actually qualified to do their job versus what the gender they are, right? And you can also make the same argument with race and these other things, right? But it doesn't mean that even women who are put in those certain positions, they don't have the competency to be able to work those positions because they do. A lot of the work is, we're basically largely in a service economy right now. So you don't really need a lot of that physical labor or that kind of, even though those jobs exist in overwhelming numbers and men aren't filling those jobs, you still in the modern society don't need that physical movement or physical force. So yeah, when we talk about a society, we're trying to get an equal amount of participation in the economy and in workforces, especially with women, yeah, you can understand why those laws are put in place. But if we're talking about, I think your argument, it goes back to the physical thing. I think in that aspect, when we're talking about getting women in terms of using things other than just physical attributes, I think there can be some equality in there. Because for instance, even when we're talking physically, we can't give birth and women can't. So that's
there can't really be though. There can't really be equality because again, if the enforcement of any of these things that you want to do, like let's say, and I'm not saying you specifically want to do them, I'm just saying you is like a euphemism, right? But if you say like affirmative action, let's say you want to implement affirmative action, you're going to need enforcement to do that. Because if you have people who aren't complying with affirmative action, you could say, I'm going to shut your business down. They say, well, no, fuck you. I'm not going to shut my business down. And you're going to send enforcers in, and those enforcers are going to arrest them and shut the business down, this type of thing. Under threat of violence, those are always going to be men. So again, it can never truly be equal ever.
Yeah, but I'm saying if we move the physical stuff aside, because now you're bringing it back to physical.
You can't.
Yeah, if you got someone who's got to physically enforce the law and not enforce the law, but enforce whatever. Yeah, okay. Largely, guys are going to be more effective at it than women. You got no arguments there. If we move the enforcement side set aside, right, and we're just talking about C-suite jobs or even jobs that are like, you got a desk and a chair and you got to type away or do some call center type shit. It's stuff that men and women can equally do, right? So it's one of those things where in certain aspects, when you remove the physical, there's certain equalities that's there, and there's certain laws to protect those rights too as well. Now, I would say that with the rise of feminism, it's gotten a lot more worse than what it is, right? But overwhelmingly, the women now and today have just the same rights, aside from the physical, as men do, right? They the right to liberty, life, pursuit of happiness, all that thing. We
as long as men let them have it, yes.
Guys, wait, in 5%, I want to wrap up the open portion of the debate and move on to closing thoughts and then super chats and then open panels. So just a 5-minute heads up to making the arguments you want to make.
Well, can we just go to closing statements then?
If Duke is okay with it, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
well, you open first, Duke. I'll close first, so you have the last word. I think that's fair, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
So largely, I'm not sure when we started fleshing this out that there was that much of a disagreement. I think Duke actually agrees with me. He just kind of, I think, doesn't want to concede that he agrees with me, but I think he does. That kind of largely rights enforcement comes from men, and it always will, and it does everywhere on planet Earth, even right this second. I don't think he disagrees with any of that. And further, that women's rights definitely are going to have to be enforced under threat of violence, and so it's the enforcement arm that really gives them their rights. So, I mean, you really can't run away from the fact that men give women their rights. They don't get it from anything other than, now, he made some good arguments that I've heard before that I can just kind of concede to right away because they don't actually hurt my point, which is that, yes, women can use coercion as a form of cooperation. Women can use coercive tactics in order to have men enforce their rights against other men. I see them do that all the time. They seem to be fairly effective at it. And I think for the most part, men tend to want to protect women. So we kind of go out of our way to kind of yield to that coercive nature. We kind of go out of our way to yield to that coercive nature. And we're very indulgent because we're very benevolent. Men are benevolent at the end of the day, really. More benevolent, I think, even than women are. So I can kind of concede those points, but it's kind of irrelevant because on the whole, whether or not men can grant these things to women, or women can use coercive measures to have men grant rights on their behalf, men are still the ones who are doing the granting of the rights. And there's just really no way around that. No matter which logical chain you walk down here, you're always going to come back to men and women cannot truly be equal because the grantors and guarantors of rights are always going to be the physical enforcers, which are men. And if men collectively decide not to enforce women's rights, women cannot on their own behalf do that. So therefore, you just kind of have to concede that this is a truism. It's a descriptor of what is, not making an ought claim of what should be, or even that it's moral or right or great or anything like that. Just saying this is the truth and this is how the world operates, and there's really no way around that. So I appreciate your time, by the way, Duke. I appreciated the debate. I thought it was fun.
So
I'll yield the rest of my time over.
It was interesting. Like, to even piggyback off of that, there wasn't anything that we disagreed in. It's just basically the statements is what I have, like the way it's structured, right? Because the point he's making, and I completely understand, when you look at these top levels of government, top levels of corporations, men usually fill out that spot, right? So if he wants to make the argument that rights are given to women by men, right, from that standpoint, because men had a lot of these organizations, I can see where you're coming from. But if we're talking about in the sense of governments and what we think rights are, meaning equal pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness under the law of the society you live in, and I'm talking Western societies here, then yes, rights are enforced by men and women that participate in those governments, whether they're talking about enforcement being physical, although not in large numbers, right, in the military or in the police forces, then yes. But even in governmental systems as well, you will find women in there, maybe not to the same scale as you will find men, but women and men both work in these institutions to protect the rights of everyone that participates through voting, through joining the police forces and all these different things. So I agree with that. What I don't agree is, saying that rights come from men in this situation directly, because technically he's wrong. It's the government that not only states what the rights are, but then enforces them too as well. So that's the big difference. So if you want to talk about globally and in general, yeah, he does have a point. There's a lot of that stuff that happened where men head a lot of these institutions, and women, largely are in the minority when it comes to that, especially in the enforcement side. But we're talking about in westernized nations, we're talking about in modern nations. If we want to talk about the institution of government, it's a little bit mixed. So that's what I got to say about that. But other than that, I don't think it was, really much of a disagreement. It was basically that wordplay there.
All right, cool. So let's get into super chats. We have 7. Okay, questions for both. Because of feminism destroying the family unit, do you think men will get together in the future and overthrow the system, create new patriarchy? 1/3 of men didn't get any last year. Okay, let's kick it off to you first, Duke.
All right, it says, because of feminism destroying the family unit, do you think men will get together in the future and overthrow the system to create the patriarchy? No, I think men or women are already doing that. It's called the right. Right. So if you think about what do you call it? The whole political space right now is a pendulum. We just came in from 6 to 10 years of just leftist woke shit. And that pendulum is slowly swinging towards the right again. Right. And the thing is that it was actually, I wouldn't say it's by design, but think about it. Right. Kids who grew up in the Bush era, who were still in kindergarten or things like that, who, were under that heavy Republican or conservative bullshit, even going back to the days of Reagan and things like that. Right. A lot of them, they grew up with a different type of mentality, right? And this is what most people call leftist type of mind mentality or ideology, things like that. These kids grow up and they get infect these institutions, the media, even government institutions and other corporations, that you see a lot of these mentality being enacted physically, right? So I think that men and women, excluding the men and women who are sick and tired of the cancel culture, they're sick and tired of the, you got to pronoun this and pronoun that. I think it's going to be a collective action to go ahead and turn things around. My big worry is that we might actually drop the ball and have the pendulum swing too far to the right.
Okay. What's your answer, Andrew?
Well, the answer is yes. You can kind of see this happen in real time now. There's more and more women who start off kind of as feminists, who go after different men's rights advocates. And the more they intermingle with them, kind of the more sympathetic they become. I don't think it's intrinsic to women to hate men at all. I think that they, generally speaking, love men. They love all the things that men provide, and they tend to enjoy us very much as we enjoy them, in fact. And it's interesting to see how many of them have become, especially in the last decade, extremely sympathetic to men's advocacy and men's rights. So I do think that you are starting to see kind of a pushback against this feminist propaganda. You're starting to see a lot of prominent women push back on the right to vote for women. And there's good reasons for that, in fact, which we can even get into. But yeah, they're pushing back on that. They're pushing back on all sorts of things, which are more privileges than they are anything else. So I do think that the pendulum is beginning to push back against that. How far it goes, who knows? Who knows how far it'll end up going. But I do think that you're definitely seeing that for the first time in my lifetime.
So I'll answer as well. I do agree with what Andrew said, but in terms of a full-on overthrow by men who are not getting laid, no, because typically, not vast majority of the time, men who are not getting any are not in positions of power, because if you're in a position of power, chances are you're going to be getting some. So it's a little bit of a paradox. So the men who are not getting in laid or not having any success with women are not in a position to overthrow anything, right? And the men who are, getting a lot of, girls or whatever, they're married, they don't have no incentive to overthrow the current dynamics. So, well,
disenfranchised numbers to X amount can overthrow institutions using legitimate power structures. So it is possible that you could have enough actual incels, not the LARPing incels, but men who can't get laid, I guess you would call it, whatever. It is possible that you could have such a huge disproportionate dynamic like you do in Japan with the herbivore movement that you could actually see dominant power structures come out of that. So I'm not sure I agree with Alex. I do agree with him in the sense that we're not there yet, for sure. I can see it emerging. It's emergent.
Theoretically, it could happen, but I would say, just to counter that real quickly, like, what percentage of people in power do you think are incels? Like, I would venture to say it's a very small percentage.
Here, right now.
Yeah.
But this movement seemingly just really got started, where you have men and women kind of coalescing around the unfair shake that men get versus the amount that they give to society. So I think that you could see enough disenfranchisement where you could start to see actual power structures form around this. Now, this isn't going to be anytime soon, but within the next decade or 20 years, I think you might be surprised.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one. The idea that enforcement ontologically precedes rights is bogus argument of might makes right. It's true all tyranny is permitted. I think this is directly towards you, Andrew. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I'm not saying that, so I'm not even making an ontological argument here. I'm not making an ought claim, as in what I think should be the case, because you are right. You could attack kind of the presupposition here and say, no, there've got to be some rights that we can concede are rights or something like this. Rather, I'm just giving a descriptor of what is. And what is right now globally is might makes right, whether you like it or not. That descriptively is true. And it seemingly has been true for about 3,500 years. It doesn't mean that it's correct, but it is true as far as how the world operates.
Okay. For Duke, if an EMP hit and knocked out the power grid for 2 months, how long could women survive without men?
So if the EMP hit, are all the men dead?
No,
assuming no one's dead. It's just electrical collapse, like no computers, no technology, no electricity, nothing like that.
But they don't have access to men
women
for
would
some reason.
survive as long as it takes to get the grid back up, and the men got to work for it. So the question sounds stupid. It's missing some shit.
Well, it's not missing. Well, it's not missing anything.
It's missing reality. If an EMP hit and knocked out the power grid for 2 months, how long would women survive without the men? That's already assuming that the men got knocked out.
Right. It's an entailment of the hypothetical that there's no access to men.
I'm not dealing in hypotheticals. I don't deal in hypotheticals.
Yeah, why test your logic? That would be absurd.
What?
Why test your logic? That would be absurd. That would be absurd to test your logic with a hypothetical because it doesn't directly map onto reality, which a hypothetical isn't supposed to do.
The reality of the statement is, if it got knocked out, where are the guys? The guys didn't get knocked out either.
The guys in the purpose of the hypothetical, it's been explained, aren't there. They're not there. It's an entailment of hypothetical. It's literally how long could women survive without men? What does without mean?
Men are still there. So
what does the word without mean?
Men are right there.
Does without mean with?
They're not surviving without the men.
What does the word without mean?
So the better question would be for Duke, if an EMP hit, all right, along with a hydrogen bomb that only kills men and it knocked out the power grid, and there's just women left for 2 months, how long would women survive?
So you understood the intent. Did you understand the intent of the question?
Huh?
So you understood the intent. You understood the intent of the question.
Let me try to steel man what Rachel's saying. So let's assume there's a virus that comes out of China that kills only men and every single man dies. So I think her question is how long, and let's assume that at the same time an MP goes off and kills all the power. How long would it take for women to rebuild? I think that's what she's getting at.
All right. First of all, I don't even think rebuilding to the point of having what we lost in humanity, that I don't think that'd be possible, right? And how long will women last? They'll last as much as the resources that are left over. And as soon as they're gone, I mean, if those who don't know how to fend for themselves, they don't know how to do it, they'll just die along with it. I mean, what kind of question is that? I mean,
well, let's reverse it then. How long would men survive?
Men will probably, not all men will survive, but I would say you have some pockets here of people who survive, in general. Now, if you want to compare it to women, like men and women survivors, right, you'll have probably more male survivors on average than women. But at the end of the day, if we're just isolating it, then yeah, you think most guys aren't even in shape to join a military right now. The hell, you think you're gonna send them out there? You take the average guy and put him in the wilderness, he's dead. All right, now you put the average guy with an average woman in the wilderness, the average guy has a more of a chance to survive because that's where the physicalities come into play and all these other things. And then, they could probably out-survive the women on average. But
yeah, but she's saying the women, let's say the plague comes through and just like takes out the women. Okay. All the women, they're all gone one day and an EMP hits. Do you think that men could make it, whereas women wouldn't be able to? That's the intent of the question.
Men on average will probably make it longer, but then you got the issue of reproducing and reproduction, right? Because that's where
they would just all die of old age, basically.
We'll all die out. So at the end of the day, we're still dead.
Yeah, right. I get it. It's just the point of the hypothetical.
All right,
I know. It's
let's
just a
move on.
dumb hypothetical.
Let's
Whoever that lady is.
let's just move on. Let's just move on. All right. To clarify, it's the pursuit of virtue which leads to happiness. The founders evade the word virtue because they don't want to sound Catholic. Okay, I think that's just him making a point. I don't really think that's a question. All right, so that we got through all the super chats. So let's.
Well, no, that's a good point that he's making.
Okay.
So what he's saying is that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were kind of making it sound secular because they didn't want to sound like they were part of a church hierarchy, which is what the Puritans initially ran from, was the Anglicans in Europe, right? So he's saying that the founders themselves were saying that the word virtue should have actually been put in there, the pursuit of virtue, not the pursuit of happiness, and that's a God-given right to pursue virtue, which I think that's actually a pretty persuasive argument for an unalienable right, something that can't be taken away, because I think you can take away a person's ability to pursue happiness, but I'm not sure that you could ever take away a person's ability, short of killing them, to take away the pursuit of virtue. So I think that's actually an interesting argument.
Okay, anyway, let's move on to the open panel portion of the show. So there's going to be some requirements. Number one is don't come on just like ask for general Tinder advice. Like, let's keep it somewhat.
They're saying you skipped some super chats, by the way. My side is.
I think there's one from Rachel that I skipped. Do men have a monopoly on force? It's a question for Duke.
Do men have a monopoly on force? It depends, right? Are we talking about like a physical enforcement? Then yes, because overwhelmingly men represent those roles. Are we talking about governmental body? Are we talking about overall what we call participation in civilization? Then no, men don't have the monopoly on force, because if we're talking about the full participation, women are also half of the voting block. So again, you almost have to take away the rights for women to vote for them to go back to men having the monopoly on force. But till then, if you want to talk about physical enforcement, you may have a point. But if you're talking about everything else, it's cap.
Now, do you mind, Alex, because we were dual streaming, if I read off the super chats that I have?
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Wilhelm Bones sent in $10. He just wanted to support the stream. Appreciate that. Wilhelm Bones said nothing. Circle G says, I remember when I was 3 years old and Mr. Government Man came and asked me to sign a pact so I could remain in the country, Duke. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't remember it. Every kid born in the United States right now is at least $70,000 in debt. All right, that's just basically what it is. You didn't sign up to take on that debt, but it's your debt. It is what it is. That's your pact. The moment you got a social security number, that's your pact. You don't have to sign anything or do anything. It is what it is.
$5 comes in from Anglo Christian. He says, Duke, how would you feel if you skipped eating today? I'm not sure what the point of that question is.
I feel emaciated because I actually did skip eating today. It's the day of Pentecost. I'm drinking, but I'm not eating.
Are you wait a second. What is your religion? Just curious.
Catholic.
Nice. $4 comes in from Young Old Boy. Says, Duke, you're not intelligent enough for this convo. You don't understand. Everything comes down to a threat of violence. You are stupid. That's what he said.
Well, I guess I'm retarded. What do you know?
$5 comes in from Gordzilla. He says, I think the argument's about rights, but the only one that is right is Andrew. Appreciate that very much. $5 comes in from Woodshop the Wise. Says, look at this super chat I made. That's kind of funny. That's all I had, Alex. I just wanted to make sure that mine got read as well.
Okay, anyway, so let's we're going to open up the panel. We are going to do one person at a time, and we're going to have preconditions. So
I just find it funny that idiot said I'm stupid, even though we largely agree. It's just we didn't agree on the way it went down. So I don't know. I mean, were you even listening? Hey, whoever that was, hey dummy, were you even watching the show? You sound stupid, bro.
His name is Young Old Boy, if you want to call him by name.
Young Old Boy sounds like a pedo.
All right. So anyway, so we're going to open up the panel. So here are the ground rules. Number one is keep it somewhat on topic, either questions for Andrew or Duke. You can ask me a question, but if it's on this topic, don't ask me about Tinder. We have to save that for another stream. Number two is no blatant disrespect. If you want to disagree with one of the calls, that's fine, but no personal insults or anything like that. Yeah, I guess that's basically it. I guess we'll just go one at a time. We'll go for probably 20, 30 minutes.
By the way, Alex, if you bring on Thorpe's, I'm done.
Okay, that's fine. I won't bring them on.
All right. Don't want to fucking deal with fucking Thorpe's and their bullshit.
Who's Thorpe's?
They have some drama or disagreement or whatever. What's your guys' history?
It's not of any concern to this.
Okay. Sorry, Thorpe's, can't bring you on. right. There's a whole bunch of you guys that were saying you want to come on for the open panel. I see only Ben Thorpe in the backstage and no one else.
That's what I kind of figured, right? Anything they can do to get access to me. So that's not going to happen.
Okay. Well, I'll respect your request not to have someone on. That's not a problem. Okay. Let's bring on the next person. Sorry, Thorps. Okay. Eli. Hello.
Hey, what's going on, fellas?
Not much. So, yeah, what did you want to say or ask?
So the main question that I have to ask is, do either of the interlocutors understand what a right actually is?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah. At least from the perception, possibly. It depends on the worldview. If you want a definition of right, would you like a secular version of that or a Christian version of that?
Yeah, you got to be
or some in between?
I'd like personal definitions of the term right from both speakers, please.
Yeah, so I would just say that a right is a social construction around things that we think we ought afford other people. Just something along those lines.
You're saying a riot or right?
A right.
Right.
Oh yeah. So it's the pretty much what we have right now in terms of a government, right? Because again, there are two types of rights, but we're going to talk about the secular one. It's your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and not to have that impede by any other forces out there.
So, in both of your minds, a thing that could be stated to be a right could be changed in the future.
Of course.
It's always changing. There's always constant change.
So in that sense, what difference is there between a right and a regular old statute or law?
Nothing other than what we afford it.
So basically all rights then are contingent upon the will of the general body of whatever state under which a person unhappily lives.
And
I would agree. Yeah, I would largely agree that that's I would agree that that's necessarily the entailment there is true. So I think
so. Therefore, hold on a second.
Hang on. No, you hold on a second. I'm answering the question.
All right.
So unless you were to go a different route towards, something that had grounding behind it, and then said that there was an affording of rights based on that, if you're just kind of talking about the conceptualization of we afford X to people because we think it's a good thing, then yeah, necessarily it would be governed by just kind of some collective will of faceless individuals who say you have a right or don't have a right. Yeah.
Does that qualitatively change my analysis, or is that just your commentary?
Well,
what is your analysis?
It qualitatively may change it. If you think that I couldn't be convinced that there are rights, I could be. I just couldn't be convinced that there are rights outside of a social construction. You'd have to make something that is epistemological or ontological, an argument from that framework in order to convince me of rights.
Okay, so in my view, rights are the actions which must be permitted based on the teleologically grounded aspects of a being's actions. In other words, a cat has a right to hunt mice. Human beings have a right to talk about theology. And, a rock doesn't have rights.
Well,
do you understand me?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but you need to ground it for me. So
you're mixing two things. So
just
you're
making
talking
the
about
statement,
rights as in just being alive, and
well,
just
you
being
said teleological
rights under law.
Well, hang on. You're saying teleologically, right? Why would you have? Why would there be a right from a teleological perspective?
Well, simply because God created different entities with different purposes, right?
Sure.
So given that God has a purpose for every entity which he has created, those entities necessarily have certain actions or behaviors or even internal dispositions that are congruent with their design. And those actions stemming from that design can necessarily be described as rights.
Well, then why? Well, then you have to kind of explain even if I agree with the descriptor of this, why would they have a right to enact those actions, even if they were purposely created to do them?
So you're saying there's a disconnect between...
Don't ask me a question, answer mine.
Okay, can you restate the question one more time?
Yeah, so my question to you is, even if I were to grant to you descriptively that you're correct and that these things were created for a purpose, why is there a right that they be able to commit to that purpose?
Well, the right to commit to the purpose to which, for example's sake, a human being is designed is necessarily granted because the stakes of disobeying that design are so grave that to fall afoul of that design is worse than any possible other type of mistake.
That doesn't answer the question.
Yeah, it does.
How?
No, it doesn't, bro. It really
how does
doesn't.
it answer the how does that answer the question? You're just saying the nature of this thing by not allowing the nature of this thing to enact its own nature, the outcome is bad. Okay, I can concede that the outcome may even be bad, but you need to explain to me why you would afford it the right to execute its nature, unless you're saying that we should execute rights based on outcomes.
Okay, so do you not believe then that God has desired outcomes?
But that's assuming that you believe other people believe in God.
Assuming if I were, hang on, listen, I'm going to answer your question. If I were to assume that that's true, then why would you assume that the desire of his outcomes wasn't that you didn't afford rights for outcomes? If that's what the descriptive statement is. That's just silly. If you can't make the idea of predetermination, and then at the same time you make the idea of predetermination, say, well, you stepped in on the will of predetermination because that already would have been predetermined.
No, I'm not making a predeterminist argument. In fact,
yes, you are making a predeterminist argument.
No, you've fallen on the horns of your own argumentation, because if it's the case that God has imbued people with free will, and Duke, please, I assure you, I'll be coming to your version of this bogus argumentation later. If it's the case that God has granted free will to human beings, then it necessarily is the case that he prefers one mode of action over another.
Yeah, but that doesn't answer the question as to why you would have a right to implement that action.
Because if God prefers one mode of action over another, then he would simultaneously prefer that other human beings facilitate this mode of action as opposed to obstruct it.
Why does the one follow from the other? Why is it a necessary entailment that because he has a preference for this, that he prefers that you act in a way which facilitates the preference for the nature of a thing?
I mean, you have to consult your Bible for these answers, Andrew.
So you don't have an answer?
It's not a human answer. I mean,
right. That's right. These are extremely complex questions. I agree with that. I'm just saying, listen, I'm trying to be maximum charitable to you. I don't think that you can really tell me any more than anybody else can where a right comes from, other than it's socially constructed out of a person's brain. You don't have any grounding for it biblically either.
Okay, but if it's the case that rights are only a sort of emergent quality of a person's brain, then in my view, it's safe to say that there's no such thing as a right at all, but rather a legal standing.
Yeah, I agree. Largely, I agree.
Okay, so couldn't you then easily round out this debate by saying, what are you talking about? Women's rights, men's rights, rights in general, they don't exist?
At the beginning, listen to the intro.
All right, well, fair enough.
I did right at the beginning. But
right,
it doesn't mean I can't give an internal critique based on what somebody else thinks a right is. You agree with that, right, Eli?
Oh, I totally agree with that. And to this point, and I'll be very brief, playing with fire, you're a great moderator.
Thank you, sir.
Where do you think rights come from?
Governments or societies?
Okay, so a government or a society, those are two very different entities. Don't you agree?
Not really. All societies have some level of government or governmental body.
Yeah, but isn't it possible that a single society might have two different governments?
Define a single society.
Well, a single society might be the total people in Jefferson County, Louisiana. How about that?
Okay, and their rights are granted and protected and enforced by the city of Louisiana or the state or whatever.
Yeah, what about the federal government?
The federal government enforces those rights too as well.
And what if the federal government infringes on the rights that are granted to them by the state and county governments?
It's beyond, but no, it's onto the people to fight against that, and they use the same legal system to be able to fight that, right? So, for instance, I don't know if you're familiar with the ATF and the pistol brace ban that's going on right now. You have private organizations like the NRA and other special interest groups that, although have connections with government, right, they still fight to keep those certain policies in play, right? And the reason is it's not because
Duke, you're talking about particulars. Do you understand what I'm asking you?
That's why I'm talking about particulars. What do you mean? I understand what you're saying.
No, you don't, because what I'm really asking you is, are there certain things about a human being that entitle them to certain modes of behavior and prohibit them from certain other modes of behavior?
Yeah, it's called biology. It's called
that's a very strong concession. So now you're saying nature is what provides rights and doesn't provide rights, right?
No, I think there's certain laws known by nature. If we're talking about human rights, right? So we know, like murdering someone, like right now, if we go into the Bible, right, the first murder that happened, right?
Stop. You literally just said,
Eli, we're getting too long.
Not expound on what I'm saying. If we go to the Bible, we're talking about the first sin where it was when two brothers like literally just murdered each other. All right, that was in there, so that we know that's wrong. So we know that there's certain laws where you steal from somebody or you do something, like we know that's wrong. That's something that's intrinsic. Matter of fact, we also that's probably what a lot of our secular laws come from, and the fines and the incarceration that can happen with that. But yes, actually, what are we talking about?
So it's not biology, though. You agree it's not biology?
No, I disagree. There's a level of biology into that. For instance, you're not going to go in and murder a bunch of kids. To a lot of human beings, there's something in your gut that it's wrong to do that. And biologically speaking, you see kids as the next generation. So that wanting to protect them is there. It's not just with kids too. It's with women. Vulnerability.
Stop, both of you. We do have to move on to the next person. I'll let you give your closing.
I don't know what he's saying.
I know we got to move on. So go ahead, Eli.
My closing remarks are the topic of what a right was in fact the basic topic of this discussion. Andrew defended his position against my Socratic hemlock drinking inquiry better than Duke. Duke, you got to relinquish your adherence to John Locke and his understanding of social contracts. Look into Christianity. No, he's not on point. He's not on point. He's an atheist.
Even the likes of Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I think they all were on point because listen, bro. Oh my God, dude. I don't even know.
Look, they're off point. Anyway, see ya. Bye.
We got to move on. Thank you. Okay. I honestly apologize about
I don't know where this guy. Where do you get these people?
Not sure, but he said I'm a good moderator.
That guy was making.
I always appreciate
that guy, just because that guy was making grounded ontological arguments doesn't mean that he was doing anything wrong, right? He had a legitimate field of inquiry based on the grounding for what we considered rights to be, and it's like I don't know why these guys are viciously attacked. This is a fucking debate. This is a debate. Like these guys have. That was a great viewpoint that guy had. I know that a lot of you fucking degens can't understand what these people are saying, but he made good points. He really did.
All right. Thank you for that closing remark there, Andrew. All right. Let's move on next to JP. JP, what you got?
Hey, how you doing? How you doing, Duke? How you doing, Android? Alex, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Nice to meet you,
Andrew,
JP. How are you doing?
nice to meet you. Pretty good. I've been listening to the debate. It's been enjoyable.
What's the avatar of? With the three arms and the guitar. It just looks badass. I'm just curious.
Oh, that's the logo for my company, the Unconventional Man.
Oh, well, that's a fucking badass logo, dude. Anyway, go ahead.
Appreciate it. Yeah, so I actually wanted to maybe just chat a little bit. I don't want to take too much of the time here on morality without the use of God. I don't know if we can chat about that. If you're open to that.
Sure.
So before I start, I'm sure you're familiar with the non-aggression principle.
NAP, yeah, the NAP.
Okay. Are you also familiar with universally preferred behavior?
Well, I think I am, but it depends on which worldview you're talking about. From which worldview? The libertarian worldview?
I will say libertarian more, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just define it real quick before we move into the question.
So universally preferred behavior. So an example would be, that would be the easiest one. So if I were to steal from, for example, if you were to steal from, how can I put it better?
I don't know.
Now I forgot. Okay, got it. Okay, so let's say that I want to steal. You want to be stolen from, and I want to be stolen from. That's not theft. It's considered borrowing. You're just lending your stuff. Or
right.
for example,
definitionally, that wouldn't be theft. Correct.
Or let's say that I want to be great, and you want to be great during sex. Then it's not great.
Yeah. Right. Correct.
It's just correct. Kinky sex.
Yeah. I agree.
anything that goes against the non-aggression principle, and it cannot be universalized. It cannot be. You know what? We don't even have to use morality. We can use ethics, because doctors have ethics, lawyers have ethics. So if something cannot be universalized, then it's not ethical. You can't make it. If it cannot be universalized, then it's not ethical.
Well, what behavior can't be? What behavior can't be?
Specify, yeah.
Well, what behavior can't be universalized?
Violence. Assault,
that can be you. Why
theft.
Couldn't those things be
Violence is
universalized?
Universalized, bro.
Oh, simple. Because who wants to? I can. If you want to be assaulted, and I want to be assaulted, that's not assault. You can't universalize assault.
Can I say
that means that we're boxing.
JP,
that means that's free will.
So the grounding presupposition here is based around consent.
Oh, correct. The non-aggression principle. Correct.
Right. Okay. So the problem with the presupposition, though, is that you can universalize these behaviors and call them moral, right?
No, I never said they're moral. I said ethical.
You could universalize them and call them. You could universalize them and call them ethical too.
So let me ask a question. How can you universalize theft? How can it be universalized? Why
couldn't you? You just say that there's no problem with it. Why couldn't it be universalized?
Then Andrew, you do know that by default, if you say it is not theft, it's borrowing, it's lending. You cannot universalize theft.
Well,
you cannot universalize rep. For example,
I feel like
hold on. You can though.
No, you can't. No, you can't.
Yo, it's part of
by definition.
Nature. A lot of these things you're talking about
by definition,
right now
you could.
Are all human natures, bro. They're all part of they're us. That's what we do. Not saying that each human does that, but that variation lives within us. The ability to steal or rob somebody, envy, jealousy, and even just murder. That happens. That's something everyone is capable of, especially in this day and age. So I don't know what maybe you want to define universalize, but I think that's something that's a mainstay in human nature.
It just means it's ethical for everybody to engage in X behavior.
Well, let me ask you this, Andrew.
Good reasons, or reasons people can determine for good cause, and some people can kill for completely just immoral causes, right? So I don't know. Is murder? It just depends on the perception.
All right, Andrew, what's the definition of theft? So we could get that all out the way first. What's theft? The definition?
Just taking property doesn't belong to you.
So that would involve force, correct? Would that involve force? Would theft involve force? Would theft involve
with or without force? It can involve.
How can you steal without force? It's not theft then. How can you steal without force?
Fraud. when you want to talk about like what are you all these crypto frauds have been going on? I mean, what are you talking
that's
about?
force. That's
on
force.
a massive scale. People's savings
That's force.
being wiped out. That's theft.
That's force.
You don't have to
That's
harm
theft.
someone.
Yes, because it's done without my permission, without my consent. That's force.
Intellectual property theft.
No.
I can steal your ideas. I don't have to hurt you. I mean, I can hurt you financially.
So under that,
I mean, there are multiple definitions of theft, but it's still taking something that doesn't belong to you. Versus the government steals from us, right? I mean, I would consider it stealing, or even certain corporations, right? So I'm just saying, like, where'd he go?
Oh, he dropped off. I guess I don't know, but you can finish your point if you want.
I mean, I was kind of addressing him, but I mean, if Andrew wants to go ahead, bro.
Well, I was just going to ask him if under his. Well, I'd have to ask him, but
he's back. Okay, he must have had.
Sorry about that. I pressed the wrong button by accident.
Yeah. So JP, under your worldview, assume for a second that a woman has, like, I don't know, she's just old. She's like 80, 90 years old, and somebody convinces her to give up her, X amount of dollars to, like, maybe one of these Target scams, goes and buys a bunch of Target gift cards and willingly gives that person the gift cards. What, how would that definition entail force in your worldview?
She was coerced. She was frauded.
Yeah, but
that's coercion.
Well, wait a second. What makes it fraud? She consented.
Oh, she was deceived. It's not. So here's the thing. If I'm being deceived,
hang on, back up. Wait. Hang on, back up.
Oh, okay.
You said the word deception. That's interesting. Are you saying that if you make a product then and you're deceptive in your marketing of it, that you're doing something immoral?
Well, that's a great question. But that is a great question. As far as marketing, here's the thing. As far as the marketing concept, you're saying that, because now you're jumping. You went from the lady example, which I just explained to you that is a sign of that's defrauding someone. So that goes against the aggression.
But someone's aggressing on me. Right, but what makes it fraud if there was consent? There has to be something, and there's no force. You couldn't point to a physical force. You say coercion. Hang on, stop. I'll let you talk. I promise. But you can say that, hey, there's coercion, which happened here, but coercion itself isn't force either. Hence, the reason I asked you, is it coercion and therefore immoral for you to perhaps deceptively market a particular product that you have? And if that deception is there and it's immoral, should there be repercussions for it?
For misleading someone?
Well, just being deceptive. So, for instance, let's say I say I have a beer, right, and I give you the exact alcohol content, but I say it tastes better than every other beer, and it doesn't taste better than every other beer. I'm being deceptive, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So, did I do something immoral?
It's not. You can't universalize that, because that means
why couldn't you universalize it?
I'm gonna explain right now. Universalize mean, it's like, first let me explain universalize. By universalize, I mean a remote control. If I have a remote control and I said that this is a universal remote control, it's gonna work for every TV except for Toshiba and Sony, then it's not universalized. Now you're talking about deceit. Deceit cannot be universalized because I cannot want to be deceived, right? And you want to be deceived at the same time. Then that means that we're into some weird, I don't know, delusional. We probably have some schizophrenic thing going on, but you cannot want to be deceived and deceive someone at the same time. Then it's not deception. It's something else.
JP, I got to move on to the next person because we do got to wrap up.
I'd like to follow up with this conversation. Hit me up in the Discord because I find it interesting. I always enjoy ANCAP philosophy, and I appreciate
me as well. Thank you.
Maybe you guys can link up anytime. Yeah, I'll. JP, you have my number. Don't you?
You just hop in my Discord. The links are in the description on the channel, JP.
Okay, there we go. Okay, cool. Let's do 2 or 3 more people. I'm gonna try to keep it 5 to 7 minutes per person. Let's bring on Junior. Hello.
Hey, what's up?
You have massive feedback there. We have to. Yeah, wait, hang on. You have massive feedback. Let me bring on the next person. Just try to fix your feedback. And
maybe you got a window down if you're in a car. You might have a window down.
Yeah, I'll bring you back up, Brad Collin, after the next person. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, let's bring on Kashmir. Hello.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What's going on?
I have a question for Duke. Can you show me the social contract? Is there a piece of paper?
Yeah, it's called your social security card, and every tax you filed with the government every year since till this date.
Yeah, that's done at gunpoint. If I don't do that, I get killed.
No, you get imprisoned, like Al Capone.
And in prison, I'll get killed. Yes.
Well, I mean, unless
equivalent.
listen, do you know how prison works? They're not just gonna attack some kind of white collar crime guy, bro. You didn't pay your taxes.
Well,
they're not gonna kill you over there.
I will be in prison. I'll have to try to escape, and I'll probably get killed.
Well, that's your fault.
No, that's the duty of the prisoner is to escape imprisonment.
The duty of the prisoner. Well, yeah, you can escape through your mind and your
But
thoughts.
let's
Most
skip that.
prisoners
Okay,
find it that way. They read a book. Some go into law. Some
That's
of them
fine.
even get into philosophy. There's escape. You don't. It doesn't
Sure.
have to be physical.
it's
It could be
all right.
mental.
All right. I
Time
understand.
flies.
I have limited time. I have a quick question, quick follow up. Do you believe right now that you owe me $100?
I believe right now you owe me $100.
Possibly, but how do we find out?
Well, we just got to find that contract.
Exactly. So as far as I understand, if we didn't have a contract, we'd have nothing to talk about. But also, there's another problem with the social contract. It seems to be constantly changing. For example, I agreed to pay a certain percentage of. Let's say that you're right, and I agreed to pay taxes, and I agreed to pay 20% of everything I own every time I earn something in taxes. But the government can print money. And meaning that by the end of the year, when I have to pay taxes, the money that I earned was already taxed by the inflation and by the money given, inflation through printing. And on top of that,
But
there's
why
inflation
do governments feel the need to print?
I don't care.
Who cares?
No, you have to care because you have to figure out why they need to print. They print because people, they let the politicians convince them into voting for more maybe social programs, maybe more things that are wasteful and expensive, more government bureaucracies, maybe slip in some Exxon special instance contracts in there too as well, right? So people vote into that, and guess what? When they vote with their dollars because they're promised free stuff or it perceived as free stuff, the government has to get that money from somewhere. They can't raise your taxes because you're going to instantly notice that year after year. So they have to do it the other way. It's called the hidden tax. They print as much money.
Okay, good.
A concession you want right now, and then later on you suffer for it. But it's like that. It's like that man bear pig type shit on South Park, right? You sign that agreement, and then you gotta wait 5 years when it comes back. And when you're ready for it, you can't lie. You know. Listen,
so it's not a contract. You'd agree. It's a very weird contract where you can change
Great episode,
the
by the way.
contract.
Great episode.
Yeah, I love that episode.
Anyway, go ahead, Cass. Sorry.
It's all right. I'm just taking a note that there are hidden provisions in that contract. For example, one of the provisions is the Selective Service Act. That's also right there, right? Which is it's basically the.
I wouldn't say it's hidden. I'd be careful to say that. They're very vocal about that.
They're very vocal, but not many people understand it because it's like euphemistically named.
Who is it up to understand that? It's up to us. We just put it on people to always take care of us. I mean, look at it. We're already starting from a dependent mind of thinking. We have to investigate these things. We have to understand how the economy works, even how money circulates through the entire system. We have to investigate that. You can't listen. The structure designed today isn't designed for you to understand how it works. It's designed for you to ignore it. That's why they don't teach you credit courses in school. They don't teach you all these things that could even get you into more realistic ways of surviving in this world. You don't hear that. Even debt management is something that's pushed out. So it's up to us to stop falling for this bullshit a lot of the politicians do, because it's all verbal wordplay, and then they slip all these contracts under these little these titles that sound good, like Freedom for America Project or whatever the fuck it is, and then they get to slip in a bunch of special interest group contracts in there and all these other extra money that we don't know where it's going, and it just becomes a whole mess because we're being lulled to sleep by a bunch of other shit.
Wasting your time, Cass.
It starts with us.
All right, I got the message. Andrew, do you believe that the social contract exists?
No.
No?
Necessarily, it really can't. There was no agreement out of the womb So there's no social contract. I think that's cope. In fact, it's it's an enforcement mechanism to say, like, you live in society, so you must follow the rules. And it's like, well, not really. We can also just kind of fucking change the rules, right? So there is no such thing as an actual social contract. That's just made up left-wing cope from my perspective.
Andrew, let me just follow up with that. Would you ever fart in a person's face?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Depending on the content, I think it's hilarious sometimes.
Okay.
Wait a second. You've never had a friend around, like, let's say you're 15, 16 years old, and you've never gone by and just like fucking gassed him real quick and laughed at him? Don't lie to me, Alex. You have.
Yeah, when I was 15, 16, I mean, that's
that's social contract.
Wilson.
Would you do it now?
As an adult, yeah, would you do it?
Would you?
I would not, no.
Never? Not even if it was a close friend? What if they gassed you first, bro? What if they gassed you first?
I would probably not be friends with people who fart in my face.
Yeah, I mean, but like, what if you're just fucking with each other?
Okay, Andrew, would you fart in a random person, a person who's not your friend, a random person that you don't know?
Like a progressive abortionist? Yeah, probably.
How about a fellow? How about just you don't know anything about them? You don't know if they're church going.
No, not a random. I wouldn't do that to like just some rando. No, but like
why not?
somebody I didn't like or somebody who had.
Yeah, you don't know anything about them. It's just a random person.
Yeah,
so
probably not.
Why would you not do that?
Because it wouldn't follow any Christian virtues I can think of.
Okay. All right, there. That's all I had on that front. Do you have anything more you want to ask, Casimir?
No questions. Just the last guy, JP, doesn't know how to argue about
Mr.
concept.
E, my boy Mr. E in my chat says, I save all my farts for elevators. That's kind of funny, right? You can see that that's funny, right, Alex? Like, yeah, there you go. Like, lighten the fuck up, man. Let's relax.
That JP guy should definitely.
You think I'm uptight, Andrew? Is that your criticism of me? Is that I'm too uptight for these things?
No, I'm just fucking trolling you.
There we go. Okay, so is there anything else you want to say, Casimir?
No, just that the last guy doesn't know how to argue for his positions. So there's no universal preferable behavior. That's garbage. Forget about it. Molyneux is a great person. I spoke with him several times, and he might remember me. I helped him prepare for some things, but I don't like that part of his book is the weakest part. The book is great. Buy it, but that part is awful. I'd like to speak to that man to help him sharpen his arguments.
Well, I think he's going to hop in the Discord, so why don't you find him there, bro?
Cool. There we go. All right, thank you, Casimir. Have a good one. Okay, let's do two more people. So we got Junior. Hello. Let's see if his audio is better.
Hello.
Yeah, we good? Terrible. It's fucking terrible.
I'm in a church.
Your audio is still pretty bad.
But it's understandable, though. So I mean, I can at least understand.
Let me see if I can lower your mic. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. So my question was for Duke. You said that the government is who enforces the rules, right? Or enforces our society, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what if all women are in power?
Huh?
In the government. What if all women are in power? What if all women are in power in the government?
What if all women were in power in the government? Is that what he said?
Yeah.
Okay, in relation to what?
That all women got into power, got into the government, like they're in charge.
Well, I mean, so are you asking what if women got into the government? So are you saying it in relation to the type of enforcement measures that are going to be taken, or like, what are you trying to say?
I'll say the whole.
Junior,
you said that the government enforces the rules.
Yeah, this is unintelligible.
Yeah, we really can't understand.
I'm like, bro, I actually really want to answer your question.
I know, but we can't understand it. Junior, just come back another time, please, with a better audio. We just really can't hear you. But I appreciate you jumping on. Amen. All right, Duke, since there's one person who says he wants to call you out for not being Catholic, since I gave Andrew the option of not having someone on, I'm obviously going to, give you the same option. So do you want me to bring him on?
Bring him up. Show me my opponent.
Okay.
Bring him up.
There you go.
What's good?
Howdy. It's Duke. You ain't Catholic, bro.
No, I'm Catholic.
No, you're not. I provided Alex a link showing your statement of belief in a previous video. We can review that real quick to show that your
Oh,
statement
you mean when I
is
said I
not-
switched over to Christianity?
it's not permissible in Catholicism.
What are you talking about?
It's not compatible with Catholicism.
What was the statement, Lou?
What is it? Is it me just saying I switched over to? Listen, do you know what the context of it was?
Yeah, and then you went on to say that your belief is a higher belief than any religion.
Right. So, bruh, I'm Catholic and
No,
I
you're
say
not.
I'm Christian. Listen. I say these things, but like I'm Roman Catholic. That's
No,
just my
you're not,
childhood
dude.
thing. But like, no. I'm letting you know. Aside from my show, I'm letting you know right now. That's just what it is. I
Do
say
you
things,
engage
but
in
like that's what it is.
sacraments?
But at the end of the day, I don't give a fuck about any of these religions. I really actually don't. Like at the end of the day, because to me, it's like I'm one of those people that go through the motions of it. That's just what it is. I don't sincerely believe that Catholicism is the one all be all. I don't believe
Catholicism
that.
Then
I don't
requires
you're not a
believe in any
Catholic
one of these
then.
things. At the end of the day, I'm just agnostic. That's just how my mind works.
Well, then you're
I
not
don't-
Catholic.
Well, I know. I still go to church. I still participate. I go through the motions.
You do.
You're
You
not
engage.
Catholic.
You do the sacraments.
I take communion.
Okay, so but you don't actually
I've been
believe.
baptized.
But you're actually agnostic when it comes to your belief
When
structure.
actual belief, yeah.
Well, then you're not
Dude,
Catholic.
you got to go full Band-Aid off. It's just so much better when you stop believing in fairy tales.
Yeah,
Dude.
no. The thing is, it's like I got a family, and it's mainly just familiar ties that's keeping me with this right now.
They'll understand.
It's become like a tribal thing. But at the end of the day, I do believe there's a higher power. I just don't think that there's just because here's the I've been battling my mind with just the part of me that just listens to the scriptures and listens to different variations, and it's like, what if we're wrong? There's always that question in the back of my mind, so I can't ignore it. But I'm not just gonna abandon the people that are there, like my family, everyone, bro. Like this is
Then
how
you're not Catholic, dude.
not in belief, but in name, yeah.
Well, then you're not Catholic.
There are a lot of people.
You're
There are a
just
lot
not
of people who are
Catholic.
saying they're religious, and it's the same thing. It's just religion and
Well,
name.
well, you can't point over and say, "Well, that guy's not religious too." Like that makes a point for you. You're just not Catholic. You're just not objectively not Catholic, dude.
No, I don't think that's what it means, dude.
How could it mean anything else? You can't say I'm an agnostic Catholic. That's an oxymoron.
I can have two different beliefs in one head. I don't,
Not
bro.
if they're
Like,
oxymoronic. Not if they negate each
Oh
other.
my
You can't
God,
say you
okay.
can't say I believe in
so
God
I
as an
believe, I
atheist.
believe in the fact that Catholicism represents family to me, right? Because I have everyone that worships. I go to I follow the motions, right? But in terms of the actual like what if that's always in the back of my mind, I can't ignore it. So if that doesn't make it a Catholic in your definition, it
No, in
is
anybody's
what it is.
definition, not even in your definition, it's an oxymoron. So try to answer this question for me. I believe in God. I don't believe in God. Can those two straight statements be true at the same time?
Yeah.
What? How could they be true at the same time?
I believe in God and I don't believe in God. There's something out there, but you don't know at the end of the day.
Well, then you're saying in that case you're agnostic, so you don't believe in God.
No, I believe in God. I just don't believe in certain definitions and behaviors of God. Because at some
The
point,
definition that
it
your church gives
contradicts
to be Catholic?
it just starts contradicting each other. And then when you actually have to face certain contradictions, you're almost able to have to force to just face reality or answer that nagging question in the back of your mind.
I think the
What
super
if you're wrong?
chat. I think the super chat.
Hang on, Alex.
Wait,
Alex, I
wait,
got
wait,
one
let
quick
me-
Alex. One
All
quick
right,
follow up. One quick follow up I've got for you, Duke. Is Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, but you're agnostic.
Maybe he existed, maybe he didn't.
How is he
Like,
your
something-
Lord and Savior if you don't even know if he
When
existed?
you get baptized,
All right, I'm gonna
say-
redirect.
Hold on, Alex. When you get baptized, they say, "Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" Right? Do you rebuke the devil? Yes, obviously, I rebuke the devil. If the devil's out there, I rebuke it. If Jesus is out there, I accept him as my Lord and Savior. And I know there's something greater than this. And if that's Jesus, and let's say I die, because I wouldn't know until I'm dead, but I get there. And let's say Catholicism wins, then oh, hoorah! I've been following this faith throughout, but I just have my doubts. That's just it. So
Okay.
if that doesn't, I don't understand why that's such a.
Let me just read this super chat because number one, it was a super chat. Number two, I think it kind of explains the issue. Duke is probably culturally Catholic, but his beliefs differ. I mean, I think
That doesn't mean anything. It's just
Yeah.
nonsense.
No, it
Cultural
does.
Catholic
dude.
It's just
and not
nonsense.
There
It's
are a lot of
nonsense.
people. There are a lot of people in this country that actually it's kind of the same thing. They're culturally religious, but they don't adhere to certain.
He likes
aspects of
the
it. It's
cultural.
what it is.
Like you can be culturally Jewish, for example. You don't actually believe everything in the
Yeah.
fucking Torah, but you like
like
the
Jewish
tradition. You like the
gangsters out
tradition
there that
aspect of it.
fucking run
Yeah,
loan
Alex, to
sharking
actually believe
companies
the,
and like
to actually be the thing, you have to believe the thing.
Yes. It's
You can be-
necessary. It's literally the laws of logic, the law of excluded middle. You
Do you
can't
think-
say that I'm an atheist Christian. That's just it's fucking nonsense. You
No,
might
but
as
there are
well say
Christians who
you
think
might
like
as well
atheists.
just
That's not what he's saying, though. Do you think?
that,
you can
well,
be,
no, it is. Culturally Christian means you could be an atheist, but you're still a Christian. It's fucking nonsense. It's nonsense, bro.
Andrew, do you think you could be culturally Jewish but not religiously Jewish?
No, I don't think. I think it's not. I just told you it's nonsense. Nonsensical.
What do you think about someone who, for example, likes the Jewish tradition? They like doing the fucking whatever the fuck it is the Jewish people do. Let's see, that's how little Jewish I am.
Then they're secularists who enjoy LARPing as Jews. That's
Okay,
what they are. They're not. They're not
Oh,
Jewish. They're not Jewish by religion.
No, because they went through the process. A lot of them.
So what? It's not
Bar
religion.
mitzvah, they're
It's not.
at that point, they culturally identify as Jews, no matter what, even if they don't follow necessarily all the rules. I mean,
No,
maybe the
well,
meat they eat isn't too clean. I don't know. Either way, they still culturally function as Jews.
Duke,
What's
at
up?
Mass, the Eucharist, is it transubstantiated?
You have to explain what you mean by that.
Transubstantiation. It's a paramount of your sacrament of communion in Catholicism.
So the bread and wine literally become the flesh and blood of Christ. Yes. or
Okay.
no?
So, do you actually believe that?
Yes.
Of course he does. He's Catholic. He
Okay.
believes in transubstantiation.
And I tip my hat off to you, but I'm not gonna sit there and say this wine I'm drinking is literally the blood of Christ, because clearly we know where they get that shit from. All right, we're not gonna say these wafers.
Where do they get it from?
I don't know. They got like their own like fucking warehouse shit, especially the church I go to. The
Yeah, but
brand
that's what
doesn't,
transubstantiation is. It's transforming it, right?
yeah, it still tastes like wine.
Yeah, I get it. I'm just asking you, like, if you don't even believe in the sacraments that you're taking, why are you even taking the sacraments?
Because I'm culturally Catholic.
Yeah, that means
Lou.
you're not Catholic.
Dude, that's crazy to me. Okay.
All right. Did you have anything else,
It's just Lou, man. It's Cajun. The E.
Like, you sitting there acting like religion, like, bro, there's not a cultural element to it. Y'all are crazy.
Of course there is.
bro.
Of course there's. a
Okay, so
cultural
then
element.
there are people who are just culturally Christians or culturally
No.
Catholics, but they're still going
Yeah,
out
they're
there
wearing
No,
committing
they
any one of
influence.
God's. They're
No.
still listen. They're still going out there and committing one of God's main sins. Every single one of them. That's just what it is. So at the end
What
of
is
the
it?
day,
What's the main sin that they're committing?
I don't know. Some people go out there and steal. Some people go out there and lie. And they do
Well,
it
you
all
said
the
it's one of
time.
God's main sins.
Murder.
Duke, does wearing blackface make you black?
Why would I wear blackface? I'm black.
Yeah, we get it, but answer the question. If somebody else did, would that make them black?
No, it'll make them whatever.
So
skin
why
tone they
would
are.
wearing Christian face make you Christian?
No, it just makes you a guy that looks like you're Christian.
what is
Oh, bravo.
I mean, there are a lot of those guys walking around. I see
Like
them all the
you.
time. They look like they're Christians. They look
Like
like they're
you.
Jews, but bruh, they get down. That's just
Yeah, that's you, man. That's you. You're LARPing.
I just live.
Duke, you got to go full Band-Aid off, man. You got to get rid of the nonsense.
No,
Just
it's
go
not
full-
that, because like, so here's the thing. Mine goes a little bit deeper, right? Because I'm Nigerian and we have our own, like, I'm Igbo culture and we have our own cultural aspects to it. Like, we're a hardened, like, Catholicism is like ingrained in that. The holy thing that's holding me back is my Igbo culture, because to completely reap the Band-Aid is to like leave one of the standing foundations of a lot of our religious beliefs right now in some of our society. So I'm not like I'm not. I have way too much pride for that, bro. Maybe that's one of God's deadly sins. It just
All right,
is what it
thank you,
is.
Alex.
So
Thank you.
for the sake of being with my people,
Oh, he dropped
I'll
off.
do what it takes.
Okay, that guy sounded pretty familiar. All right,
And even in our own culture, before Catholicism and Christianity took over, we had our own gods. We had our own beliefs. And our gods represented polytheistic gods, right? We had gods of like anger, thunder, war, all these different things. We worship them, but Amadioha is one of them. So it's like, how do we know that our people were wrong? And then there's this one true God that the missionaries came through and told us about is right.
Okay.
Culture is different, bro.
I want to move on to the next thing. I'm sorry, Andrew. I got to read the super chat in the interest of fairness. I appreciate Duke's openness to challengers from college. Imagine if he had cried and demanded Alex didn't let this guy up, like someone I know. Okay. I don't know if you want to respond to that or not, but
I don't care. They just, like I said, anything to get my attention. And then if I give them the attention, then they cry foul that I gave them the attention. So just fuck them, right? They're just useless fucks. Look at them. Look at them. Imagine being people who sit in somebody else's chat and spurg at the, just like every fucking comment is a spurg about how much they absolutely just must talk to me, while at the same time all they do is talk shit. Regardless of who I'm talking to, I'm losing the debate. Regardless of what I'm doing, I'm a moron. Doesn't matter what it is, just anything they can do to get my attention, fuck them.
Bro,
fuck
why do you care so much? Leave him alone. Fuck them.
Why do you care if I care so much?
Because this is the second time you're talking about it.
It was brought to my attention, not me to their attention.
Who brought
to be fair,
Alex is the one who brought it up, not me.
Yeah, I brought up the super chat.
Oh, okay. My bad, dude.
Okay, anyway, so there goes this portion of the debate. I think this was a lot of fun. It got a little semantic at times. I enjoyed the energy. Anything you guys want to say before we wrap up?
Duke. I would like to just kind of extend, like, Duke, it was really nice to meet you, and I appreciated the conversation. I'd like to have future conversations in the future if we can. I understand discourse can be something that's very contentious, but I think that it's very necessary, especially in today's society. So I appreciate you coming on and having the debate with me, man.
Yeah, me and you have had some pretty heated discussions. Yeah, go ahead, Duke.
No. This is a pretty dope debate. I mean, I said largely we agree. It's just like, I guess it's just nitpicking at this point, but realistically, it's just, I think it was a good discussion. Yeah, I'd love to have some with you in the future.
Sure. Well, I mean, semantics are important to debate. People always say
semantics are important to debate, but you can get lost in them. You see what I'm saying? That's kind of what we did. But realistically, if you really think about it, semantics was kind of where we had to go, because on the overall idea, we agree. Like, I agree that men overall dominate the enforcement arm, right? I just disagree on the particulars, right? So it's just what it is. Because I say, when you dive into it, especially if you look at data now, like, women are filling in those roles and all the aspects, but generally you're right. So realistically, we both agree. I mean, it's not that we disagree. It's just, something for sport, we get into the nitty gritty. I think we just had to go there. We had no choice but to go semantics. But yeah,
well, I think it's a good thing. I think it's it's okay sometimes to like agree more than you disagree and realize that there's not really substantial debate to be had. I mean, I've had that happen multiple times with people, so it doesn't always need to be a debate. But yeah.
Well, also, I just want to point out this last thing before you close off, Alex, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
One of the chatters said, if I switch over to Marlboro 100s, then you have a huge problem because they're much longer than the regular Marlboro Reds. And I guess this gives me the speaking power. I don't really know what the comment inferred there. I just kind of think it's hilarious for no particularly good reason. But yeah, you're a good sport, Duke. You're welcome over at the Crucible whenever you'd like.
Yeah,
I wouldn't mind mixing it up again or having you on for some debates over there. So appreciate meeting you very much.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, I think this Catholic atheist thing got you. We should talk about that some more.
I think we should. I'm not a Catholic myself, so.
No, I mean, again, culturally speaking, I am.
Andrew's an atheist. He's told me privately. He gave up on religion a long time ago.